All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. This is the Doing Virtue podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Criste. Tonight, I am co-hostless. Both of them are not here, but I have some questions from them for our guest. Tonight, our guest is Jeremy Minick. He is a entrepreneur, coach, businessman, husband, father, and I talked to him a couple of weeks ago after Mass, and he convinced me to have him on the show. And I also wanted him to have him on the show, so it worked out. Jeremy, welcome.
Super pumped to be here, man. Thanks for having me on. This is I've done a couple of podcasts, which I might tell you about later. Done a couple of podcast episodes in the past. It's been a minute, but I love doing them. You know, they're super fun. It's usually I've been on your side, asking the questions and driving the conversation. But it's cool to be on the receiving end this time. So I'm pumped to be here.
Have you been on the receiving end before?
Yeah, let's see.
Or has it mostly been interviewing other people?
It's been interviewing other people. Yeah.
Okay.
Where I did it was back when I had my marketing company, which was focused on contractors. I started a podcast called the Game Changing Roofer Podcast, and had on roofing contractors, insurance specialists within the kind of the storm restoration space, and probably had like 10 episodes that I did. Really enjoyed it.
Nice.
Really enjoyed it. There was also a time where with my brothers, so I've got two brothers and a sister. We thought about starting a podcast called Two Brothers and a Mic, which was a play on words between the microphone, but also to my brother-in-law, Mike Miller. We thought about having him as a guest on the show, so we're going to have two brothers and a mic. We did 2 6 a.m. episodes. They were a tech disaster and also very sleepy-eyed. And after that, we just said, I think let's just stick to phone calls.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny. I've had a few different people on that have their own podcast or are kind of in a teaching position in life. And it is interesting if you have someone on who doesn't do that for a living, they very much just answer the question like it's a job interview. But if you have someone who's a teacher, they not only answer the question, they either ask a question back or they'll kind of keep going, which is fine because it makes for good conversation. But it is funny how some interviews I very much feel like, okay, I have to ask another question. I have to keep it going. And then some interviews I'm like, I think I'm being interviewed. Like I can't really tell if it's me or them. I feel like they're the host and they're doing a good job, so I'm not going to stop them.
Yeah, exactly.
But
tonight I think obviously you'll drive with some questions, but I'm genuinely excited. I think it'll be a great conversation. I'm bummed that Brian and Mark couldn't be here, but at the same time, too,
they're dead to me.
One episode, that's it.
I know. Well, this episode is gonna be a testament one way or the other. I think this is actually the first one I've ever done by myself.
Nice.
There's 3 of us, so it's pretty frequent that one of them can't come because between scheduling for me, a guest, and 2 of them, it's almost impossible to consistently have all 3 of us and a guest there. So every once in a while, one of them will be missing and we just give them a hard time. But if something goes wrong technically, or if I misspeak constantly, then they're going to give me a hard time. So it goes back and forth. Tonight we are drinking Wild Turkey, but it's a special edition. It's the 101 Rye. So there's a 101 and then there's a 101 Rye. The Rye is a little bit more expensive than I think the 101 with just normal bourbon is like $27, and this is closer to $50. I think it was like $43 on sale. Has a lot of good reviews. I did open it over the weekend and had a little bit. But yeah, that's what we're having tonight. I've got some tasting notes that I'm going to read. But of course, as always...
You guys can't see it. He said it. He opened it a little bit, but it's basically bone dry at this point.
Yeah, right. Just a tiny little bit. We're just kind of kicking the last bit of the bottle. So yeah, on the show, as everyone who listens, I don't know what the word is that I was going to say, consistently. Yeah, there we go. Those who listen consistently, will know that we try to have a drink on every show. It gives us a little bit of something to talk about at the beginning. It usually is also enticing to the guest, because there's some people who are a little bit, suspicious about coming on. Then I tell them that we'll have like a free $50 bourbon. And then they'll come on. So that does show that people very easily can get bought.
That's smart. Yeah.
So,
smart.
But also it's a good excuse for me to buy something and try it. So anyway, this is the Doing Virtue podcast. Cheers.
Cheers.
We have more to that, but with my co-host gone, it's kind of meaningless. All right. So some tasting notes for this puppy.
I'm a novice when it comes to whiskey, but I do enjoy it.
Yeah, we also are. Usually what we try to do is talk about the tasting notes before reading the tasting notes and then see how close we get, because there's this mental thing where if you read something, then you taste it, or maybe you don't. Like my personality is I'm a little more like argumentative, so it'll say that there's a certain spice and I'm like, I don't taste it, I taste this thing, you know. So
Totally.
So anyway, before I look at it, I actually noticed this on Sunday before looking up the tasting notes. It does have a lot of vanilla to it, which is odd because a rye is usually very peppery. But so it's a very smooth rye, which normally means it's more expensive, not always, but usually if it's a really cheap rye, it'll just taste really harsh and peppery, and sometimes it's good. But this one I like because it's smooth enough that you can drink it straight, but it's also strong enough that it would go well in an old fashioned without like getting watered down, which a lot of bourbons, I think a lot of times people buy cheap bourbon and they make an old fashioned and then it's just like too weak. So yeah, there's definitely a vanilla. Yeah, it's not very spicy, which is nice. I think generally people try ryes and they don't like them just because it's too much. What are you getting?
I must be one of the people that doesn't drink rye too much. There's the cough. I really do enjoy whiskey. I enjoy sipping it neat, but
do you have a go-to?
If there was a go-to, not really. You know, the classics. Okay. You just pick it off like kind of Tullamore Dew or
sure.
Buffalo Trace, another one that I like. I do love an old fashioned. That's typically, if I'm going to drink whiskey, that's how I drink it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you do the regular bitters or do you do orange bitters or both?
Usually the regular bitters. Yeah. And I found too, this has nothing to do with actually the quality of the ingredients, but a sweet looking ice cube is a game changer.
100%.
You know, I think the presentation of an old fashioned makes a big difference, obviously, in how you experience it.
Yeah, it is crazy if you make it at home and you're using like your ice machine ice cubes or like the tray ice cubes, and you have a glass that's too big, and you have like an orange that's maybe a little old, or you're using one of the little like cutie or mandarin oranges or something, you can make it taste okay. But if you get like a cold, like frosted glass, a big round or square ice cube, a smaller glass so that it's actually proportionate to the drink. Yeah. I like using orange bitters and the Angostura bitters because I like mine to be a little more orangey. And then if you use a really high quality like Luxardo cherry, they're a bit more expensive. I think they're like $25 for a jar of them, but there's probably 50 cherries in there. Yeah. So if you do that over maraschino, the quality in that drink, you take it from like a $3 airport, $10 airport drink, but it's like a $3 quality to like something that bars would charge $25 for. Yeah. Pretty easily. Yeah. So
you're actually a man of many talents, Anthony. Not only with the podcast, but you had a time at Manor. Are you still at Manorline?
I am not.
There?
Okay. There was a temporary time when my wife was pregnant that she would go to bed at 6 p.m. pretty consistently. And so I thought I should get a job because I'm just watching TV at the home, at home, or not really like being productive. And it was also during the winter, so it was really easy to also want to go to bed early. And so there's a coffee shop / bar here in town called Manorline Back 40, and the pay wasn't amazing, but you get like a free shift drink and a lot of interesting people. I think you came in one night, we talked for a bit. Yeah. Actually several people we've had on the podcast, I pitched it to them while I was bartending because I was like, hey, I'm bartending. This is a good bourbon. We actually just had this bourbon last week, and I kind of use that as a segue to talk about the podcast. And usually people that would come in, especially if it was just them, they would sit down, and that actually kind of gave me the idea. We were already doing the podcast, but it really kind of, solidified the idea that just like having a drink and talking with someone was just like my favorite thing to do. Yeah. Because the bar was usually fairly slow unless it was like a karaoke night or trivia night or something. But yeah, I would just be there, make a drink. I'd recommend, they would tell me I kind of like these. I don't really like vermouth. They'd give me some parameters, and sometimes I'd like create a drink or try to find a drink that they would like, and then we'd talk about it. And then a lot of times they would just kind of open up to me. Like they'd have nothing like it wasn't like they were being super vulnerable, but they weren't confessing their sins, but they were, they were telling me about their life and their job and their family or their dating life or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just a bartender. And, I very much like playing that person of just like, let's just talk about whatever's interesting. And usually the most fascinating things come up without you trying at all.
Yeah.
And if you can capture it with a recording, I think that's cool, and people can get a lot of value out of that. And if not, it's just like people are so interesting. So I just really enjoy doing that.
Had you already started the podcast when you were bartending, or did that come after?
Yes, I had. I think we had done a few episodes, and then we took a little break over Christmas, and we had some editing things and whatever. And then I think, but as I was bartending, I was like, no, like I'm meeting local business guys. People are coming in after like Rotary meetings, or they're coming in after sporting events, and I just want to sit, like I want to put mics right here and interview them. We're at a bar. There's a sweet backdrop. The lighting is great. And I was like, I just want to make a drink for them, talk about it, and then talk about whatever they're doing. And so I think it did solidify, like, okay, I do want to pursue this, even if it never makes me money. It's fun. Like, it's just fun. And if there's something that I can do that's fun, even if it doesn't make money, it's never work. It's always fun. Yeah. So, So I just keep trying to do that. And that's why I'm not very picky about who we have on. That's not a discredit to you, but like we have pursued bigger guests. We have got some bigger guests. We have some in the future that they're scheduled a few months out. But I also just like talking to like just random people. Like, I don't know, like not crazy
Absolutely.
people. I'm not talking about like the homeless guy on Main Street, but although he probably would have some interesing things to say. Like, I would love to interview someone that works at the Naughty
You should
Pine.
talk to my barber.
Is he homeless?
Maybe. No comment. No comment.
Does he live in Front Royal?
He does. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Many who would listen to the podcast would know him or probably used him in the past.
Okay.
He's the man.
Okay.
This
isn't Buddy the barber from back in the day.
This is not
right?
Buddy the barber.
Okay.
This is Rich the barber. Rich and his son Rich.
Wow. An ironic name for someone being homeless, potentially.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Both started Rich's Barber.
Okay.
It's out of it's a nice spot of it. It's out of a basement. It's over near the soccer
Nice.
fields. They've turned that into a shop. But he's just a man of many backgrounds and stories.
Wow.
And kind of goes through these phases where like sometimes his hair is like real trim and clean cut. His beard's real trim and clean cut. And then like you'll see him 2 months later walking around downtown and it's like, you okay, Rich?
Yeah. Just got back from an Appalachian hike. Yeah.
Yep.
There's a place, it's down at the end of the street back in the day that I used to go with my dad, buddies. I don't know if you ever went there. It may have closed before you came to Front Royal. But it was, growing up, I'd never wanted to be a barber, but I remember thinking, if I ever have money, I want to make sure a place like this exists in my town.
Yeah.
And it had the classic barber pole outside. You go inside and he had a kids table because, the dads would bring their kids. They had a coloring table and it wasn't really a lot, but it was out of the way. He always had John Wayne movies playing on, like, I don't know if it was a channel or if he had owned a bunch of movies. He had a life-size cutout of John Wayne. He had all the classic, like, antique barber tools kind of hanging around that you could look at, like, on shelves, kind of, at waist level. So really anyone could look at it. So you'd see the old leather and the shaving blades and stuff. And then he would give out Tootsie Rolls to whatever kids were there. And that was it. It was really simple, but he did a good job. And I just remember going in on Saturdays with my dad and he would like get a haircut and he would do the lather. And it was, probably for, until recently, that was just what haircuts were. But now you go to a place and it's like, it just feels cheap and you're overcharged and there's some tattooed woman giving you a haircut. And you're like, where is the like Saturday morning, like John Wayne is playing, I'm getting a real haircut and then I get a bourbon afterwards. Like, where is that place? So it's on my list of things to do.
Yeah.
Classic barbershop.
That's awesome.
Buy a cigar,
One of my classmates, George Dewey, he's actually got a barbershop up in upstate New York. And I believe the name is Speakeasy Barber.
Sweet.
And it is exactly what it sounds like. I mean, it's just this really cool, kind of that kind of dark vibe to it. Nice leathers.
Yeah.
He lives right near a bunch of his family members, so they come in for haircuts. Their children come in for haircuts. The clientele of their friends come in for haircuts, and he's really built up a solid book of business. But he was telling me recently at a wedding I saw him at. He just said he just loves doing it, and like you said with bartending, you get so many stories. You get to meet so many people. You kind of become, as a barber and as a bartender, like you truly get an intimate look into people's lives, and they share with you things that they don't necessarily share with other people. And it's pretty cool.
All right, you've convinced me. I need to have a barber on now.
Yeah.
I actually have always been interested in
a barbershop.
Right.
With a podcast.
Man, I don't know how we can combine all that, but I'm totally down to try. Yeah, there is something fascinating about barbers. Like, I feel like men have very few things going for them in terms of the way that they present themselves. Like, yeah, you notice if a guy dresses well or has a nice suit or is, athletic or, he works out, whatever. But a lot of, I think, what makes men not attractive in a physical sense, but attractive to be around, someone you want to be around, is their character and is like their sense of humor and a sense of like, yeah, just masculinity. And that's kind of a hard thing to duplicate. There's a lot of little things I think that kind of add up to someone that you would say, oh, they're a good guy or they're a good man. But one of those things that I think really stand out is hair, because that's kind of something like guys don't do their nails. They don't do like there's very few things you do other than just what you wear. I think like maybe watches would be one thing, but having like a sharp haircut or like trimming your beard well and keeping that is kind of a big thing that I don't think a lot of guys think about. And I'm not sure why. I think it's probably just laziness or something, but I think that there's also not a good place to go do it. Like, I think a lot of guys want to dress well, but there's not a local suit store that they can get a nice suit at, or they want to have a good haircut or like a really well trimmed beard, but there's not someone they go to who can actually give them good advice on how to style it, how often to trim it, those sort of things, because the hair cuttery locally doesn't care,
Yeah.
And the same thing with like cigars. I've noticed, like, I think a lot of guys really want to be into cigars or really want to like do manly things, but there just isn't an avenue. Like, they kind of have to blaze that trail on their own or find someone who's already doing that. Hunting maybe would go in that category of like, oh, I want to do that, but I don't really know how. And that's kind of not the priority. Which maybe is just the time we live in, that it's not the priority, but
no, I think,
but it is neat to like
accurate.
have those things you want to do. And then it would be awesome to be able to provide that to guys. Like, here's an avenue. Here's another way to be manly, So.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true with the haircuts. I feel like you always notice when your friend or yourself, you look in the mirror, right? And like the hair is kind of just gone off the rails, and it's just like, all right,
I know I'm one to be talking right now. My hair is really long right now, but
it seems to reflect how you're doing in your personal life, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
I
think that is
the
true.
times when you're kind of disheveled and long and ragged.
Yep.
It's all of a sudden you look at your calendar and you're like, man, I'm kind of running late to a lot of things, and I'm kind of missing appointments. Right. All of a sudden you get it trimmed up and you feel like $1 million.
Yeah.
Shoes have actually been a big one for me.
Shoes. Okay.
And not that I go crazy, but I do appreciate a good haircut. Again, not crazy with the style, but I appreciate a good tight haircut. Shoes have been another one for me. It's like an easy place to have style. I think it's difficult as a guy, to really have the style with pants and with shirts and suits, and like there's a lot of components there, but shoes is an easy place where you can kind of get a little bit creative, have some fun, kind of stand out without too much investment. And that's me. I'm pretty low profile, I'd say, when it comes to like fashion and that stuff. I don't want to maintain it, to be honest with you. But I do like to look, simple, clean, and put together.
Something I've noticed recently, now that we're like 25 minutes in, we haven't talked about anything real, but this is real. So
we'll either keep it or cut it. We'll let the fans decide.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, up or down. Vote. Something I've noticed recently with shoes is that probably in the last 5 years, more so, and that's just because I was in college not too long ago, and now being in the like professional business world, you're right, you do notice when people dress well, and I think especially with shoes, and primarily because there's been this, I think in the last 3 years there was this big move, at least in my life, probably on a larger scale, and by the time it comes to Front Royal it's like 5 years late, but of guys wearing like the dress boots. And I think some of them look good and I think some of them look bad, and that's just people's choice on color, people's choice on what they wear it with. But I think it was kind of an interesting style move, because it's not going to more comfortable. It looks better. And I think a lot of times the tendency with style is to go with what's more comfortable. So you've got like the stretchy shirts, you've got the stretchy pants, you've got you name it. It's like all trending towards like golf clothing.
Yeah.
Whereas with the boots, I'm sure some of them are comfortable, but they're not more comfortable. Like, they're not the boating shoes. They're not like track shoes. They're boots. They've got high tops. You lace them up. Like, they're boots. And I thought that was kind of neat because number one, it's not moving towards comfort. It's for looks. So people are actually dressing for the look of it and not just the comfort. But two, they're also like dress boots. So they're not work boots. They're not something that if you wore them, people would say, oh, you're wearing like construction boots to a dance. It's like, no, I'm wearing boots, but they look like dress shoes. So it was, to me, I thought that was a really interesting like style shift. And then of course now with like Hey Dudes and all these other shoes, now everything is very much like, what can we get away with? It's kind of like pajama shoes almost, you know, it's just,
Absolutely.
So it is kind of an interesting thing where, like professional attire has become more casual. And I think there is a line. Like I've seen people wear shoes that I don't think look very dressy, but they wear it with a suit and they kind of pull it off, or like the t-shirt with the suit coat. And I'm like, I don't really like that. But then I see people that have the right color combo and it works.
Yeah.
So,
well, anyway. I think that's reflective of the culture, right? I don't think that's an accident that style has trended towards comfort over like the actual style of it all. I think that's absolutely on purpose. This is a bit of a segue, but you know, speaking of discomfort, it was actually really cool this past weekend. Well, let me say this on the clothes. Like, I think I really respect people who do dress really nicely, even if it's not comfortable, in order, obviously, to show respect, especially to other people, right? Because like in the one sense, you're wearing the clothes for you. In college, I remember a line actually that stuck out to me from Aquinas is like, your clothes are actually in a way like an extension of who you are, or a reflection of who you are. I'm probably butchering the absolute accuracy of that, but it's something to that effect, that your clothes really are like a reflection of who you are. And so that's kind of a wild take, right? To think of it that way. And then when you think of showing respect to others too, it's like what you wear, how you present yourself. Is it for you? Yes, in the one sense, but it's also for others out of respect to them. And so it's super interesting that our culture has trended towards comfort, which is what our culture trends towards in pretty much every area. This is the segue. This past weekend, actually, I got to run with my brother he was running a 100-miler.
Nice.
Down in Harrisonburg.
Okay.
This is called the Bridgewater. It's a part of the UTMB series, which is like a worldwide racing series of ultra marathons.
Okay.
This is Jake.
This is like David Goggins type stuff.
David Goggins level, absolutely.
Nice. Okay.
This was his third ultra marathon. He ran one in Florida about a year ago. Maybe 6 to 9 months ago, he ran one in Gastonia, North Carolina, and then this one was down in Harrisonburg, and specifically Bridgewater, Virginia. So the Bridgewater 100. Okay. And I ran the last third with him. So nice. 33 miles. About a month and a half ago, he kind of called me up and said, like, hey, Jeremy, there's about a 10, maybe 15 mile stretch. Like, could you be a pacer? Could you help me out basically from like mile 70 to 80? I'm like, oh, I haven't really been training, but like that shouldn't be too much of a problem. And then that turned somehow into like, hey, what if you ran 20 miles? And then somehow that turned into like, well, what if you just ran the whole way? And so without much training, I was able to make it happen. It was an incredible experience to do it with my brother and also witness him, you know, at that final third of a 100-mile race. Yeah. But it was the reason I'm bringing this up is like that discomfort physically was what I needed and didn't even know. And what I mean by that is like there's a lot of times in my life, frequently in my life, where I honestly like I try to seek out discomfort because I know I need it. And that's hard. And there's times where obviously, I'm sure you've gone through this as well, where you go through periods of a lot of comfort and comfortability and routine and schedule, and it's easy. But it's super important, especially I think for men, that we seek out those opportunities for discomfort. And certainly this past weekend was one of those. So yeah, it was an amazing experience.
You said you didn't prep for it, or you did in some regard?
I haven't prepped for it a ton. I've run 2 marathons before, so I had some context of like what this was going to take. I work out pretty routinely. I would say 3 to 4 days. I'm in the gym, mostly a weight routine, but I'll do a mile or 2 on the treadmill. And then every once in a while, I'll do like a run outside that typically doesn't last more than maybe 5-6 miles. So I certainly wasn't like very, very trained going into this race, but I was also physically, I felt confident I could hang. Yeah. The pace is a lot different, as you might imagine, you know, within 100 miles versus like a 10-mile race. Right. So,
are there periods of walking in there, or is it like running, sprinting in some sections, and then it slows down to like a jog?
0 sprinting. Okay. very much like your top finisher is going to average, at least the one who won, average, I think, around a 10 to 12 minute pace throughout.
Okay.
But the elevation gain is massive. So, like, for example, I joined him at mile 72. He started the race Friday at 6 p.m. I joined him around 9 or 10 a.m. on Saturday at mile 72. The first 10 miles, 72 to 82, was just kind of an up and down trail run. And then the next 10-mile stretch was about 2.5 miles of like a straight up ascent to the top of the mountain. And then 7 miles like straight back down the other side of that mountain, to the point where it was kind of like Old Rag-esque around here, where like you get to the top and you see all the other mountain tops. So it was an incredibly intense climb to the top with like a 20 to 22 minute pace going up. So very slow. I mean, you're slower than like just a normal walking pace. It's
right. This
arduous.
isn't just like a paved road that's completely flat. You're running 30 miles on. Okay.
Yes. So by the end of that 20 miles, 10 kind of up and down, and then the 10 that was 2.5 up, 7.5 down. My legs were just, jello, and was able to finish with him. But, it's me hanging on to a guy that's already run 72 miles. Right.
So presumably, wow, it's a lot of music. Presumably,
is that from the street?
I think so. Yeah, it's not my phone.
He seems interesting. Let's get it.
Yell out the window. It seems like the last third would be the place to go if you haven't trained, because I would assume that if you started off with him, he would have smoked you in the first 30 miles. Like, you would have been way behind. But then while he's in mile 70, you're starting mile 1. You're probably a little bit ahead of him energy-wise, but maybe holding back to keep up with him. But then by the end, you're probably both equally exhausted because he's been training for this and you're not. And so I would assume the struggle is about the same. Yeah.
Spot on.
Okay.
Yep. And I'll share a few brief highlights of that experience. And I share it just because it was just such a powerful recent experience for me, one of the first things that really stood out to me was just like joining up that first 10 miles with my brother, having already run 72. He's greeted at the aid station that we joined him at by his 8 children. Nice. And, overall, his wife, my dad was there as well. Just incredible to see that support, right? I mean, that's a unique witness. Nobody else has a family like that, joining them up at the aid station. Yeah, so pretty amazing to see the smile on his face and sort of the presence that he still had. I mean, he's certainly locked in mentally, but still very much like looking at his children and, kind of saying hi. And that's just a really powerful experience to see somebody having gone through that at the aid station like that. So joined up with him. It was a one-way conversation. I did a lot of the talking, especially through the first 20 miles. But, first 10 miles was a lot of me talking, catching up, giving him that energy boost. And then the really, really powerful moment was that 2.5 mile ascent up, which for him, you're around mile 82. You're hitting that mental wall of just like, I've literally been going, for 15, 16, 17 hours at this point, and hiking like, kind of straight up, in certain regards. And so it's just really cool to help him get through that. I paced him. I led the way. He followed behind. We averaged again maybe a 20 to 22 minute pace, and the whole way up, it's just hard to kind of hold a conversation. I'm like, look, I'm just going to pray, brother. So I started a rosary, started praying for each of his kids by name, his wife, his family, his coworkers, praying for my family, my friends, praying for faith, hope, charity. I mean, you name it. Like anything,
you're running out of virtues.
Anything I can think of. I'm running out of virtues and running out of breath. As we're climbing up this mountain.
But are you praying out loud at this point, or just mentally?
Loud. Okay, out loud. Yeah, to try and keep his mind engaged and obviously kind of off of the pain and just on the journey and just one step in front of the other. So that just kind of set this precedent together of like, this is going to be an incredible experience for the both of us. And by the end of it, it's like it was pouring rain. It had even started to hail for about a minute or two. I mean, just the weather like took a turn at the end of the race, and we finished it out together, praying the rosary, and just chatting with each other. And it was just awesome. Yeah, just awesome.
Yeah, there's something very meritorious, I think, about suffering in general, obviously, but specifically for men. Like, I think that sports do that a lot of times, depending on the sport. Not every sport you're really suffering, Like I wouldn't say that there's a lot of suffering in tennis necessarily, but it's also different because it's more of an individual sport. But especially team sports like soccer, rugby, basketball, there's a suffering there, and it is team dependent, coach dependent, level dependent. But being kind of put through the fire together and seeing who breaks after that 10th suicide run, or totally. in rugby, seeing who breaks after a tackle and they don't have enough energy, so they tackle wrong and get hurt, and just kind of seeing people's breaking points and where they give up physically, and then where sometimes people, someone you wouldn't expect, the small guy, maybe the overweight guy, has the mental dexterity to keep going, and then you're like, whoa, this guy is like still running full pace, even though he's not very fast, he's running full pace, and the star or the captain or whatever is like, on the floor writhing in pain because he's got cramps or he can't go anymore. And it is interesting to see how competition brings that out of guys, but also brings guys a lot closer usually. Not always, but usually you have this team, they're going through practices, you've got losses, you have wins, and then by the end of the season, it's kind of this undescribable like brotherhood that's formed. I would assume it's pretty close, similar to what people experience in the military, but it obviously in a much lesser, and they're not risking their life on the football field, but so the odds aren't as high or the stakes aren't as high, but you still have that end result of like this kind of indescribable, we went through this together and it's unreplaceable and there's really no way to describe it, but it was awesome. Like in the end, it was worth it. Even if you had a losing season, even if you didn't really perform super well, the fact that you put your mind to it, you got in better shape, you gained muscle, you lost weight, and you gave it your hardest and no one dropped out. There's something really cool about that, and I think it's kind of a good comparison to the life of virtue, or just the life of a Christian in general. That like you're on the path, you're on the road, you keep going, you fall, you get up, you keep going. And it's kind of a metaphor for life in a certain sense.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
yeah, I think one of the big things, obviously, coaching, as you know, has been a huge part of my life, and playing sports has been a huge part of my life. The idea of shared pain, bringing people together. Suffering, bringing people together is exactly what you're talking about. It's just the reality. Right? You don't have to go super deep philosophically. It's just, you just experience it, right? And one of the big ways you experience that is through sports, especially team sports. When you go through that pain and that suffering with other people around you, all of a sudden there is just a shared appreciation together, right? And it creates a bond in a way that it is different from not having that. So like comfort and also winning, the winning can obviously have pain involved, but if like the win is too easy, there's certainly not as much of a memory, right? Let's say, for example, in basketball, if you're just absolutely smoking another team, you blow them out by 50, that game will never be nearly as memorable as the one where, in particular, the losses are fine too, but like in particular, the one where there was a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of trial. The other team is really giving it to you, and you win by 1. That game will be remembered, right?
Yeah,
far and above by the one that you won by 50. And
right.
It's because of that trial, that struggle. And so it's just, that's so cool to see it both from a player's perspective, but also from a coach's perspective. There's also there's a professor you had on the podcast at one point, and I think this is attributed to him. I'll leave him nameless because I'm not sure if it was him, but at some point, he had shared with my wife this idea. He shared the idea that he was like, basically, sports is one of the few areas where, in particular, a female woman who might be preparing for childbirth, like, where are you going to experience like pain and suffering that will prepare you for that? Furthermore, for both men and women, death can be painful. Life in a bunch of different ways can be painful. And I think sports is one of those areas that can really prepare you. It can really test your pain threshold and set you up, obviously, to be able to endure more through time, which is a huge reason why I love sports.
We're kind of in this really interesting moment where, at least in America, this is not worldwide, but in America, largely speaking, most people live a fairly comfortable life. Even if you technically live like below the poverty line, you probably have a house. The majority of people have a house, a car, some type of insurance, some money coming in. They have credit cards that maybe aren't paid off, but they at least have them. There's fast food. You can get Uber Eats. Like, even if you're poor, even if you're on welfare, you still live a fairly comfortable life. at least compared to what most of the world lived 100 years ago even. And so I think that it is kind of, it's good that we have sports as an outlet. And I think that's obviously something that should like be pursued and we should cultivate. But it is odd that nowadays, unless you purposely put yourself in a position of suffering with like working out or a hard diet or sporting, that it's not there. Like before, that's like gyms weren't a thing 100 years ago, really, because everyone's life was hard. And then you have maybe your bodybuilders would have a gym or a boxer or something if that was your profession. But you didn't have people getting up and going to the gym. Like you'd get up and like work the farm, you know, like you didn't need a gym. And, you know, like people who played sports were like maybe upper class kids who were able to go to college and play sports and all that. But the average American wasn't doing those things, but they had a very hard life. Like even 2 generations ago, people's my own grandparents included, like worked in the coal mines, like lived through the Great Depression. And now we're talking about like, you know, trying to put ourselves in positions of suffering, which I think we should do. But it is odd that we're in this moment where it's not a guaranteed part of life. It's like you could live your entire life now almost completely without pain, almost 100% comfortable until you either get really sick or death.
Yeah.
Like you have a car, you have AC, you have heat, you have food, you're fine. You have Wi-Fi, you can watch TV the rest of your life. I mean, there's not that many opportunities for suffering other than like relationship sufferings or just like physical ailments. But your day-to-day, almost anyone can get an online job. So it is kind of this funny moment in history where we have to put ourselves in a position of suffering. But I also think it's good because it shows that people see that it's meritorious. They're like, yeah, getting up at 5 a.m. and working out actually is good for me. It's good for my soul. It's good for my relationships. But obviously we need more of it because America's the most obese it's ever been. So
I think the real question is how do we create more pain and more suffering in this world?
We just keep recording for like 4 or 5 more hours
and force people to listen. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, but seriously, I mean that's the thing is like people's problem. I was talking to my wife about this a couple weeks ago. There's I guess more backstory to this. There was a comedian I saw a couple days ago, and he was talking about how he never understood how, you know, he would talk to his wife, hey, we're going out to dinner. It's kind of a, you know, formal thing. And she'd go into her closet and go through all of her stuff and say, I have this, and I have this, and I have this, and I have this, and I have nothing to wear. And he was like, I don't understand it. Of course you have stuff to wear. And he's like, but recently in the last couple of years, I'll get home from work, I'll, you know, grab a beer, put up my feet, and then I go on, I've got Apple, I've got Amazon, I've got Netflix, and, you know, clicking through channels, clicking through sports, clicking through this, clicking through that. And at the end of it, I'll be like, there's nothing to watch. And he's like, now I finally get it. And it's not because that there isn't really options. It's because there's so many options that I'm just completely anxious and overwhelmed, and it's too much to make a decision. And I remember talking to my wife about this, and I was like, yeah, I think part of the reason that people are so anxious, obviously there's people that have legitimate anxiety or have past trauma that they're going through, but just part of the reason our culture is so anxious isn't because they don't have a path or because they don't have passions. It's because there's so many options there that they're just overwhelmed. And then the thing to do, the kind of normal reaction is to just clam up and just not make decisions rather than, wow, I have so many paths. I don't know which one is right, but I'm going to pick one and I'm going to stick with it until it doesn't make sense. And I feel like that kind of goes hand in hand with sports. And I feel like that's why sports can be or just working out, staying active can be such a good solution to anxiety, is because it's giving you a path. It doesn't mean that you're going to become the next, you know, NBA coach or the next marathon star, but it's saying the goal is X. Continue down this path until you reach the goal. And then there's always going to be another record. But it's so simple that people can stick with it. Whereas if it was like, you know, great, run a marathon, but there's no specific time. You can walk, you can even drive. It's like, no one wants to do that. It's not a challenge, but it also needs to be somewhat simple enough that people can actually understand the rules and go. Anyway, I don't know. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah. So
all these different things at play.
A huge concept for me. I mean, you're right on this. Like one of the things I think about the most is focus. And that's what you're pointing to, is like we live in a world where there's just an overwhelm of options. I often think of it as shiny object syndrome, right?
Yeah.
Whether you look at that in business, whether you look at that in athletics or sports or fitness, even your prayer life, in terms of education, podcasts to listen to, books to read, YouTube videos to watch. I mean, there's just this overwhelm of information and options available. And so one of the things I just personally try to focus on a lot is focus, and just eliminating the things that don't matter and focusing on the ones that do. Easier said than done. But I guess to point to a couple of examples there of, like, I think I would even say within fitness, my wife and I actually kind of went on a cool personal journey together right on I think it was the heels of COVID. I was an athlete my whole life, graduated Criste though. And within about a year, I think I went from more of my kind of athlete lean weight in the ballpark of like 160, 170 to 205. So, put on about 30, 40 pounds after school, from just diet, as well as, stress, not sleeping well, new to marriage, new to kids, new to, running a business. I mean, there was just a lot of like those things going on. And so like I wasn't getting in the gym as much and all those things happening. My wife, from pregnancies and some other things, had kind of put on some weight. And so like on the heels of COVID, we both just all of a sudden I kind of encountered this idea of calorie counting, which is not a new concept, but it was a concept that was new to me. And it was kind of a mathematical approach to fitness that was new to me. And it just struck me because it was so stinking simple. It was like, hey, if your weight is this would be the amount of calories that you would eat per day. And if you ate those amount of calories per day, you would maintain that weight. And if you ate X amount less than that amount of calories per day, you would lose Y amount of weight per week or every other week, et cetera, right? And it just struck me as like, that makes so much sense, right? Like if we ate less and we ate healthier, we'd probably lose weight if we're also being physically fit. And so the both of us were able to drop basically all of that post-college weight, even get down leaner, kind of since some of the college weight. And so all that to say, it's like even in fitness, there's kind of an overwhelm, maybe not even fitness, I'll call it like the diet world. You've got all these diets. You've got keto. You've got you've got the carnivore diet. You've got Whole30. I mean, you've got all of these diets, which can be, like, for health reasons, really powerful. But a lot of people just use them just to quote unquote lose weight. Sure. And it's like, yeah, but there's a simpler approach, and it's called calorie counting, and it's called eating less than what you're currently eating. And that's, again, I'm not saying that's easy, but that's the world we live in, where there's just this overwhelm of options. And there's a lot of humility, I think, in focusing on less. There's a lot of humility that's required to say no to more and to say yes to the few things that actually matter.
It seems to me like the path forward, like the path of success with dieting, it might be different for different people, but a lot of it really seems like simplifying it, like you're saying, because I think now maybe you can do it with calorie counting and you can be on top of that. But I think part of the reason why people don't work out, why people don't diet, why people don't start a business is because there's so many ways to do it. There's too many things to keep track of. There's too many apps. There's too many notebook papers with notes and trying to keep track of things and kids. And like, it just gets to be too much. And so obviously if you're going to cut out something, you're not going to say, well, we can't go to mass anymore. It's like, no, you're going to cut out the diet. Like that's going to be the thing you cut out, because that's probably what's causing you stress and taking time away from you. So if you're the person who would benefit from an app or benefit from tracking it, calorie exactly every single day, because you're more of like a scientific mathematic kind of person, then that's probably your path forward. But to me, what I've seen is a lot of people try to overcomplicate it. They try to do all of this stuff. And a lot of times I come back to like Exodus 90. Like every time I do Exodus 90, I lose weight. Not a lot, because I'm not like particularly heavy anyway, but like I will lose weight. And part of it's just, I'm not drinking beer for 2 months. Okay, well, that's part of it.
Yep.
Like even if I just had one beer a day, which I don't think I have a beer a day, but that would be a lot of it. Is just like drink water and drink Gatorade. Like that's a big part of it. And then not eating in between meals is huge, because then you're eating at meals and then you're stress eating and then you're eating late at night and then you're not going to bed, and it's this vicious cycle. So not eating in between meals. And then the third thing is just, you don't have to completely cut out sugar, but that is a really easy way to be healthy. Just don't eat sugar. And there's good sugars and there's bad sugars. And obviously there's always going to be that birthday party or that occasion or go out for ice cream or something. And I think that it's good to be able to make an exception for that. But if you don't have a strong enough will, it's way easier just to say, I'm not eating in between meals. I'm not like drinking alcohol, and I'm cutting out all sugar. And that gets you out of most things. And then if you want to go further and say, I'm cutting out carbs, I'm cutting out this and that. But then eventually it's like at the end of the day, you're eating 3 times a day, you're eating good meals, and you're eating like fruits, vegetables, and meat. If you're still fat after that, then maybe you need to exercise more, but most likely you're going to cut weight pretty rapidly just from that. And I don't think that's true for everyone, but I think especially for men, because a lot of guys, even if you have a desk job, I think still tend to stay fairly active. Like you walk a lot, you enjoy getting out and doing things. You have a fast metabolism. So to me, it's like, just don't get the sugary coffee, don't eat the dessert, don't snack, don't stress eat. And then you're probably going to cut weight like crazy. And then if you add a workout once or twice a week, you're going to be totally fine. Like you're going to be ahead of 95% of Americans dieting without, like, you're really not doing anything. That's the carnivore diet theory anyway. I don't know. I'm not sure how true it is, but
how many times, I'm just curious, how many times have you done Exodus 90?
I think I've done it completely, honestly, twice. And then I've done kind of like a cheat version, like 4 times, which I have no remorse in saying. But mainly the cheat version was like, so I still did the cold water. I still would do the workout once a week, get up on your first alarm. Like I would do those things. But a lot of times where I would cheat, honestly, some of it was the podcast. I was like, I'm going to have a drink on the podcast. This is my show. This is what I told the host or the guest that we're doing. I'm not going to cut that out because of Exodus. And I'm also not going to make them like have a drink for them and then me not partake and then be like, oh, let me make it really clear. It's because I'm better than you. Like, it's like, no, I'm going to have a drink, but I'm not going to do it the rest of the week. Like it's just going to be for the show. So I definitely did cut some corners on that. But yeah, I would really recommend it to guys. I think it can be that one extra thing that's like bogging you down. Right now we're doing the St. Michael's Lent.
Cool.
Which
that
I did with
wraps up pretty soon, right?
Yeah. It's this, is it either Saturday or Sunday?
Nice.
And even that, like that one's much more laid back. I actually really like it because it's much more doable. The hardest thing is the Thursday night vigil where you get up from 2 to 3. But the last couple weeks, so Brian and I, one of my, the co-host, we were doing that. So I think we did it twice. So I want to say it's 5 weeks and we did it twice and then he had his baby. So he wasn't doing it. So then I kind of slacked. But we're going to do it this week to finish it off. And then it's like, I think it's fasting Wednesdays and Fridays, doing the morning prayer, no meat on Wednesdays and Fridays, and then getting up from 2 to 3 on Friday morning. That's all it is. So that's much more doable. And I think it's a good way. I'm going to try to get more guys next year to do it and say, look, I understand that the cold showers and all this stuff is really hard. Do this reduced version. And if you feel like a much better person, then maybe consider doing Exodus 90. But if not, then maybe just do this. Like it's a good, up the ante. It's not during Lent. It's not during Advent. It's kind of at a weird time of the year where you wouldn't really think about doing any of this stuff. And it's such a good thing to just do. And plus the app that they have is awesome now. Like the readings are all there. You can check stuff off. It gives you a notification saying you missed something. So it's like impossible to mess up if you're half trying. So
yeah,
I would recommend it.
They've done a great job. That team from Exodus. I mean, really, they have. I think I've done it for sure twice, maybe 3 times.
Okay.
And like you said, I mean, the app is a great experience. Very straightforward, easy to follow, easy to track. Kind of allows you to check in with your teammate, if you will, through the experience. It has everything right there in one place. I mean, they've just done a great job of taking. Making it into a program and like really I love those things. I love celebrating those things. I love promoting those things, telling people about those things because it takes a lot of work and a huge commitment to like do something like that and,
for sure,
and even do it as a profession.
It's a really interesting program of like it's not a workout routine, but it has that, and it's not just Hallow like the prayer app. It's kind of both, and I think like workout programs can always improve, and I think Hallow or programs like that can always improve. But I think that the way that Exodus has set it up, you can make that your whole life. Like you can have all the prayers and all the meditations and all the reflections. But at the end of the day, you can make it very minimal. You like get up, read scripture, read the prayer. Okay, today's Wednesday, so no meat and I'm not eating in between meals. And then you go to work. And that you don't really have to think about it. Like that's all that you have to do. And at the end of the night, okay, I did my morning prayer. I did my evening prayer, did my reflection. You can check it off if that helps. If not, just know that you did it. That to me seems like a really easy way forward. And then, because I think I don't know if guys do this, but I know that a lot of Catholics really are super scrupulous about prayer. Like, oh, I missed day 3 of my novena. Am I going to get my rose from St. Therese now? I don't know. And a lot of it's just this overthinking where you're like, that's not the point of prayer. Like, the prayer isn't this, like, it's not to check it off. It's not to, did I say a rosary today or not? Obviously, that's the goal. But I think Exodus really sets it up in a way where it's like, oh, I missed yesterday. And you get back in and it's like, there's still stuff to do today. Don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about yesterday. Do these things today. And I think that really rings true with the crowd they're going for. And then to your point about focus, like I know they've had the opportunities. They've had people approach them like, hey, we want a program for women. We want to expand this. And they've just said no. They're like, we're doing it for men. We're going to add on different programs within that. We're going to build out the system. We're building chapters and communities. That's all we're doing. We're not expanding in different areas, and like we're keeping the vision very focused, because otherwise it just becomes nothing. It just becomes too vast, and then people don't want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So I think they did a really good job with that.
It's interesting too, that word like focus. I think that's one of the big reasons why I appreciate Exodus 90 so much, is because they really have maintained that focus.
Yeah.
Even just to sort of share the point, like with restaurants, with food, I love going to places that specialize in things.
Yeah.
And I actually really don't like going to places that don't specialize in things. So for example, one of my least favorite places I've ever gone to is the Cheesecake Factory.
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever been there. It's like,
my wife actually really likes the Cheesecake Factory, but that's just because of the cheesecake.
The cheesecake's great.
Yeah.
And if they just did cheesecake, they would be awesome.
Totally. Yeah.
But their menu is like 12 pages long, fine print. I mean, there's just every single dish you could possibly imagine. Yep. And like, look, it's not that bad, but the portions are massive, kind of out of control. The quality of the food is debatable. And again, like, they're not really specialized in any one thing. And I love going to coffee shops. I love going to restaurants. I love going to the taco truck, whatever it is. Sure. I love going to the place where they're specialized in a thing. It just is you're just able to obviously provide such a greater level of experience, I feel like, when you obviously do that. So I think that's what Exodus 100%. Has done so well. It's interesting too, you mentioned scrupulosity. Mm-hmm. I was recently my wife and I were hanging out with friends recently, and the subject of scrupulosity came up. And long story short, I basically was like, I don't feel like I struggle with that. And all of a sudden, I struggle with it. I kind of got internally concerned, right? I'm like, should I struggle a little bit more with scrupulosity? Like, maybe I'm not being scrupulous enough, but they're kind of sharing with me.
Sounds like you are scrupulous now.
I don't think so. Just curious, like, do you know a lot of people that struggle with that? I feel like I don't. I feel like I don't know a lot of people who actually struggle with scrupulosity.
Yes. I think it would depend on what you qualify as scrupulosity. Yeah. Like are you one of them?
I
am not.
Oh, okay.
And it is something, it's funny. I've had the same experience where someone's telling me something, either like something they're anxious about, they're worried about, there's like, is this a sin? Is this not? And I genuinely do pretty consistently feel like a terrible person because my response is, I've never once thought if that was a sin. And maybe I should. Like, whoa, maybe like I didn't think that using this bad word was a mortal sin. Like, I knew it was wrong and it kind of slipped out and I shouldn't have said it, but I never worried that was mortal. Or being late for mass. Like, I'm not the kind of person who walks in and is like, oh my gosh, like mass just started. I'm 20 seconds late. Yeah. I probably need to go to a different mass. Like, no, I'm here before the gospel. Or before, technically it's like the Our Father. Like, it's, so I've never struggled with that. I think it is something, if you're a person who doesn't struggle with that, I think it is worthwhile to consider, well, to be thankful that you don't, because it's a huge worry and a huge burden, but then to figure out, okay, maybe there are things that I'm brushing off, I'm blowing off, I'm having that third, fourth, fifth drink, I'm, doing whatever that probably isn't sinful if you actually sat down and thought about like the actions of what you're doing. Is it sinful or mortally sinful? Probably not. But the fact that you're just doing it anyway without any regard is kind of setting yourself up for something bad in the future. Like even something simple like the speed limit. Some people drive 25 on the dot. Right. And I'm like, I'll push 40. But I'm also okay, like if I get pulled over, I'm not going to yell at the cop and be like, yeah, you caught me, I went 40. And if that happens too many times and my insurance goes up, then I'll probably start caring about it. But until then, like, yeah, I'm going to push that line. But to me, I don't see that as a big moral issue because I'm prepared to pay the consequences if I get caught. And other people will never do that. They'll always drive 25. But so I think in that scenario, it's a good thing to recognize, yeah, I probably shouldn't drive that fast. And maybe there's a kid crossing the street. Maybe there's a reason it's 25, or, to be mindful of that. Maybe that doesn't change your actions, but I think it is good to be mindful of that. But I think to me, I think of it more as like a superpower in a lot of senses, because there are a lot of situations that I'll come across that I could see someone being very worried about, being very upset about, and I just don't think about it. And that can be a blessing and a curse, but I think in most situations that I can think of, it's a blessing, where I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about this thing being a problem. Like I would never do that bad action, and I wasn't tempted to do that bad action, and I never even thought about that being a possibility. Like I had a couple beers and I went home. I didn't think about, oh my gosh, what if I get pulled over and breathalyzed, and like that scrupulosity about like getting caught if you're sinning, if you're doing something wrong, if you're breaking the rules. I've never really had that, and I think that can get out of control if you're not careful. So that's a bad tendency that if you're not careful and if you're not surrounded by good people, that absolutely can get blown up and cause problems. But it is interesting because if you ever talk to someone who struggles with that, and I think scrupulosity technically is specifically targeted at sin, but I think there's little outbursts of that, not outbursts. I don't know what the word is, but kind of similar properties that relate to just anxiety, being worried, being a rule follower. And some of those things are good, some of those things are bad, and some of those things I think you can kind of suppress or find a solution to, and other things are just kind of innate. Like you're just an anxious person. Everyone knows someone that's anxious or really worried about things, or really very mindful of like people judging them for things. That's never been a problem for me. I never care what people think of me, like what I'm dressed like, and again, like this goes back to what we were talking about before. You should care what people think about you. You should dress in a way that commands respect or shows that you care about a thing. So that's a flaw. Like I should dress better. I should care about that. But on the flip side, I'm never worried about it. I'm never stressed about it. I could care less. Like I'll show up to a party where everyone's wearing suits and I'm not, and I don't feel uncomfortable. A lot of people would. But at the same time, maybe I should feel uncomfortable, So there's kind of there's an interesting back and forth. I don't know. Yeah, scrupulosity is interesting though, specifically with like, because I think a lot of times it's about minor things, like is this a sin, or should I be doing this, or they said this, do they mean that? And to me, I just don't have time for it. I'm like, I don't really care, and that's not good in a lot of circumstances. But it does save me a lot of like I just don't overthink stuff. Right. So, I don't know. Right. Yeah, but that also means I'm really bad at helping people who struggle with it, because I'm just like, oh, don't worry about it. It'll be fine.
I think I'm in the same vein as you. I think it's worth being watchful, worth kind of considering certain areas of your life a little bit more carefully. Sure. To see if you're out of step or out of line. In that same conversation, one of the other things that was shared was this idea of the three. I don't know where this came from. I'm just kind of sharing this from the conversation I had, but it was like the three different places of sin, or the three roots of sin. And all sin ultimately, I think, stems from pride. But the other two main roots are basically in the ballpark of vanity and sensuality. Yeah. Again, I don't know what, kind of the proof or what, what's the reference behind this, but this was,
what's the
conversation. Again, conversation among friends. I found that to be a very helpful lens to think about my own life in. And ultimately, I think, it's an interesting lens to look at it through. Like, do you struggle more with pride? Do you struggle more with sensuality? Or do you struggle more with vanity? And I think for me, for example, it would be sensuality. In other words, just like anything to do with the flesh. And I think ultimately control. Those are the areas of my life where I really have to, like, obviously be cognizant, be watchful, be careful. I don't think it's as much, for example, like vanity. Like, do I care what other people think? Or do I care what other people think about what I'm wearing? Or do I care what other people think about what I'm doing? I mean, of course, there's a sense of which I do, but I don't think there's an unhealthy degree there. But from the standpoint of like sensuality and just material things, or whether it be, food and drink and just, whatever it is. Those are the areas of my life, I think, where I need to be like kind of most watchful. And so it's just interesting. I always find I love learning. I mean, like in one sense, I think who doesn't, but for me, that's when I'm most like fully alive. That has really been a realization for me I've come to over the last, I would say in particular, like 2 to 3 years, is that when I'm learning is when I feel most alive. And so it's conversations like in this community, as an example. I think that's one of the things about this podcast that you and I were talking about, is we live in a community here in Front Royal, which is just filled with just truly great people, truly great families, truly great friends. And so you get to be the recipient of just incredible conversations by just being around these other great people. And so again, as an example, these friends that we were hanging out with, it was like an hour of just fun, deep, engaging conversation about everything I've just been talking about with you over the last like 5 to 10 minutes. And amazing, like where else do you find that? There's so many, I think, times in my life where you may be having a conversation and you just don't feel like you're learning. Yeah. And when I'm learning, I'm alive.
Something I've noticed, I don't know if you noticed this when you were doing your podcast, but I think that the long format model has kind of ruined conversations outside of the podcast in some regards, because and I think that I also do just like the long format where it's like I don't have my phone. I don't need to be on my phone. I don't have anywhere to be. Like, we're only halfway through a bottle. Like, I enjoy I don't have anything to do. Like, my evening is yours. We're just going to hang out and see what happens. Yeah. Which has led me to realize how much I hate small talk. And I'm not really an introverted person, but I've noticed some of it is the phone. Like, if you're on your phone, someone else is on their phone, you're in line for coffee or something. But it's very easy to not be human. And I don't like that. But I also feel like when I meet someone, it's not long enough. And so I'm like, if I'm not going to have this big, meaningful, deep conversation, then I almost don't really want to talk to them, which is obviously terrible. But, like, this happens almost every weekend after Mass, where I'm like, well, if I'm going to go get brunch with them, or they're going to come hang out with us, or go to a winery, I'm all in. I don't even care who it is. Like, are they a Catholic married couple and they seem somewhat fun to talk to? Great. What's your name? Let's go do something. But the idea of just like, oh, hi, how are you? Great homily today. Okay, we have to go. I hate those conversations because there's probably a way to make it genuine, but to me, it just always feels very forced. Yeah. And I don't want it to feel forced. Like, I just want it like, you're here, we're talking, it's great. It doesn't have any specific goal, or I'm not trying to get a certain amount of anything out of it. Like, I just want to I want to talk. I want to learn about you, about whatever we're mutually interested in, whatever. But then unfortunately, the downside to that is that a lot of the small talk, and really that's where important conversations happen, right? After Mass, you see a couple that's struggling. After Mass, you see someone who hasn't been to church in a while. Like, that's when you have that meaningful conversation. But it is really hard to kind of put yourself in that mentality of like, I have 5 minutes and I need to get something conveyed, or I need to have this meaningful conversation. So I don't know. I don't know if you noticed that when you had your podcast, but almost like, oh, this isn't worth my time if we're not going to like talk for an hour. Yeah.
No, that makes total sense. I didn't run my podcast long enough. Again, it was like 10 episodes, had a blast, but didn't run it long enough to really get a sense of that. What I will say though is, with what I do with, for work, is basically working for SmartRoof. So roofing company out of Northern Virginia, but a couple locations up and down the East Coast. And my primary responsibility there is the talent side, so recruiting. And so ultimately myself, my team members, we're having conversations every single day. For me, for example, I'm typically running, anywhere from maybe low end, like 4 or 5 conversations a day, upwards of 10 to 12 conversations a day with people interested in, obviously, in SmartRoof and the role. And so when your full-time function is like truly, in a way, like the way I look at it is like quick bricks I'll lay here. So went to Christendom, graduated with philosophy degree. Philosophy to me is about giving the right frameworks of how to think and think well, and also teaching you to ask the right questions, which is an incredibly powerful skill. The right questions lead you to the right answers a lot faster. And ultimately, recruiting is a lot about asking the right questions to get the right answers, to get an understanding of that human being and what they're looking for, and then see whether or not, the program, in this case, SmartRoof, or anything else that you're recruiting them towards, is a good fit for them. And so it's interesting where my role, my primary function at work is about, in the one sense, having a very similar kind of conversation over and over and over and over again every single day, right? There's a script, there's a pattern to the conversation, but at the same time, I enjoy it because it doesn't enter into the world of small talk. It's not small talk because I'm asking deep and powerful questions about who they are and what they're looking for, and genuinely seeking to understand those things to see whether or not, again, what we do can be a good fit for them. So it's really, I'm with you. Like, I don't love small talk either. If I'm at a party, like, I used to actually be like much better at small talk. I was like, honestly, pretty good at like bouncing around and quote unquote networking. But now I've trended away from, like, I guess you could call it volume networking, into more of like, I care more about the quality of the conversation. And so like a great party to me isn't like 25-minute conversations necessarily, depends what the context is. But the idea of a great party for me would be like 5 20-minute conversations that really, go somewhere and go deep, and get able to really catch up with somebody. I've noticed this with myself at weddings. Like there's always kind of a formula. You go to the wedding, there's some time, there's a cocktail hour, and I think I've been ruined, 1, by the podcast, and 2, by bartending, because the podcast, I want to sit down, get to know someone, have a drink, have a smoke, like really click in for a couple hours. And then with bartending, it's all very polite, cordial, quick, transactional conversations, because someone comes up, hey, how are you? What can I get you? We have this drink. We have that drink. Great. This one is this way. The other one is that way. The bride's drink is this. The groom drink is that. Great. Good to see you. And if it's someone I don't know, I can have the exact same conversation with them as I do with someone I do know. And if it's someone I do know, I'll try to maybe slip in a, how's work going? How's your wife? How are your kids? Whatever while I'm making it. But then it's, here's your drink, next. And so it's, to me, if I'm at a wedding and I'm bartending, it's like, great. I get to see, like, I love that. You get to see everyone, you get to talk to everyone, you're giving people alcohol so they love you, you're getting tips. It's like the best place to be, because you're making the party, but you're also not wasting any time with small talk. It's all very quick. They're getting drinks and it's great. You can have more if you want. No, I just see you're stealthy. I didn't even see you fill it up.
Jeremy here is trying to pour himself extra whiskey without
me. That's honestly incredibly impressive that you were able to pour 2 glasses. Hey, and I'm
a bartender at heart. What can I say? But yeah, but I've noticed that at weddings, where if I'm not bartending, or I'm not with like my wife or somewhere, I'm just like, yeah, we're gonna go out and walk and just talk about things for a long time. I don't really have a huge desire to just be popping around from person to person, and I'm kind of looking for that avenue or like scenario where I can like find a cigar if they're giving them out, or if I brought cigars or something, and then just go sit with a few people and have a really good long conversation with those few people. I don't really want to be walking around dancing, talking to different people, getting photos. Like, it's not, I know it's part of it, and it's a good, it's bad that I don't want to do that, but I don't care. Like, I'm like, no, I'm here to celebrate the couple, but to have a good time, I'm either going to be serving drinks and like making the party fun, or I almost don't want to be inside. Like, I just want to be outside where it's quiet, having a drink and talking to a few people and catching up. And I think a lot of people are probably in that scenario where they're like, they're not introverted, but they don't have enough energy to be extroverted the whole evening. So
yeah, that's me.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are that way without admitting it. They would prefer to say their hellos and, get a picture with the bride and groom, and then go outside and like have a cigar and not really be there the rest of the night. I wanted to circle back quickly. We kind of glossed over this a little bit. You mentioned you went to Christendom. I did as well. You majored in philosophy. I did not. I did political science. But first of all, what brought you to Christendom, and then what caused you to want to major in philosophy? Like, what was the draw? Was it peer pressure, or was it something you're like, this is like absolutely what I'm supposed to do?
Yeah. So ultimately, I have 3 older siblings, and all 3 of them had gone to Christendom before me. All 3 majored in philosophy. So nice. My path was pretty much scripted.
Yeah.
But I couldn't have been happier. I did not apply to any other college. I knew by about sophomore year of high school that I was like, yeah, Christendom's where I'm going to go. I had visited my siblings a couple of times in a couple of different contexts and just really, really liked it every single time. So, came to Christendom. And from a philosophy perspective, I mean, yes, my siblings had done it. I think the other big thing, and of course, you hear this from alums of Christendom, different departments within the school will go, I think, through quote unquote ebbs and flows of, for lack of a better word, talent.
Sure.
And there was a lot of talent in the philosophy department. And so with those great professors in the philosophy department, it just felt like a great calling for me of like, well, these are the people that I find to be incredibly engaging, to listen to in a class setting. And so these are the people I would love to learn from. Additionally, I there's a part of me who, loves kind of math and science, not science so much, but I guess math for like there's just one right answer in a way.
The simplicity.
Right? The simplicity. But at the same time, I'm more of a quote unquote philosopher. I love going deep in conversations. I love asking questions. I love trying to probe and trying to better understand. So philosophy was just a natural connection right there. Certainly too, I'm not going to like deny this as well. I saw counterparts going into English and having to write like tons and tons of papers. And, in philosophy, you can kind of be a little interpretive and a little creative, with your
I
approach.
thought Aristotle meant.
So it just felt like this perfect combo of, my brothers and sister had gone through this before. They loved it. The talent in the department is awesome. Personally, it resonates with me. And, there you go.
The rest is history, as they say.
Yep.
Was there a specific class that really brought you over to that side? Or was it just philosophy, like as you were saying, the talent in general was like, oh, well, this is the obvious choice? Or was there a class that you're like, boom,
yeah,
let's go, that's the class?
I don't know if I could actually say quite that, because to be honest, there were several like history classes that I loved as well.
Okay.
I took Dr. Kelly's class. He was awesome. I took Dr. Schwartz. Single-handedly, he's the only person I've ever met who can engage a class for 50 straight minutes sitting down without looking up hardly once. Yep. Like, what a talent. Like, I don't think that's the next level of storytelling. And everyone who's been in his class knows exactly what I'm talking about. At the end of the class, kind of puts on his hat and almost like once he puts on his hat, it's almost like he becomes invisible and then just like scoots back off to his office. But he's the man, and just
I really want to have him, this kind of a little tangent. I really want to at some point have him down the road. My plan is to have like a locals group, even if it's not very much money, and just have extra classes that I'm sure Christendom could produce and do much better. But give the professors a choice of what they want to talk about. And I would love to hear Schwartz just go off about like a 6-part series on Thomas More or a 6-part series on communism, and just be like, there's no script. It's however you want. Here's a microphone. Record as long as you want and stop it, and then we'll edit it together. Because I remember
that's awesome.
I had a study hall or a break between classes while his history class was going on, and he would sometimes leave the door open, and I would just sit outside his classroom and listen. And I was like, I'm learning so much about Thomas More, and I'm taking a different class on him, and I'm learning honestly a lot more in his class, and I'm not even a student. I'm just like sort of doing my homework outside of the classroom. So anyway.
No,
not to derail you, but I just like, to me, that's like
awesome.
Just having someone who's good at telling the story, not in a lecture. They don't need slides. They don't need the book, the resources. It's just them talking about the situation and explaining it.
Yeah. That would be incredible. So, he's the man. Again, Dr. Kelly was an incredible class. But my first exposure to philosophy that I remember especially, I took O'Haron. Great experience. Also took Wunsch, and he was somebody who I think was just such a lively kind of personality in the classroom. It really brought it alive for me, and I really enjoyed my first 2 classes with him. From there, kind of going now towards like my senior year, junior and senior year, Snyder taught a class, recent philosophy. Mike Brown also taught one called Modern, I believe, was what he taught, or maybe it was Ancient. But all that to say, it was kind of like the history of philosophers. Yep. I really enjoyed that combination, like the history of philosophy. that was like the perfect pairing because I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
history. And if I hadn't done philosophy, I would have done history.
Okay.
So that was kind of a sweet combo there. In terms of the most engaging class I had, it was John Cuddeback's, Dr. Cuddeback's family and household. I've told this to him a couple of different times to his face. So it's not like I'm like talking about him behind his back.
He was on the podcast a couple episodes ago. So.
Awesome. I've told this to him to his face. I'm like, I literally used to walk out of your class like furious. You know, you were the one professor who I'd like walk out with and just be like angry. And he's like, why? You know, and if you've experienced this class, I think there's a lot of part he would say he does it on purpose where he'll pose a statement that is very controversial and very direct. It's sort of Jordan Peterson-esque where he'll say something that just hits you so straight between your eyes, you can't ignore it, but then he won't necessarily give you the answer. And so he'll say something that's very direct, like as an easy example, you know, I believe like we should not use computers. We should use typewriters. He might say something that direct within the context of his class. And you're like, what?
Or like men and women, unless they're married, can never be friends. And you're like, wait, hold on.
Yeah. And it just kind of hits you. And then you seek the answer. But his like great line that he always uses is like, well, that's a great question, Anthony, and I want you to be thinking about that. And you're just like, I am thinking about that, and I'm going to kill you if you don't give me this answer. You know, but it's a powerful skill set that he's developed there to really push you and challenge you. And so that was an incredible class, and so many of the people that took that class with me or took other sections have said the same things. Like that class was the most engaging. I think a big part of that too is it's so real. It's so live time. It's not like the history of philosophy. It's not these old guys, you know, 8 centuries ago, yada, yada. It's today. This is my life, my family and household that I'm looking to build and grow. So it hits you. Hits you home.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think I wasn't a philosophy major, but I made sure that I had enough openings to take. So I took family and household, and I took friendship. I think I also took human nature with him. I took ethics with him. So I took as many classes with him as I could. And even with all of the political science classes that I was taking, I also took, family and household one semester and friendship the other semester. And I really enjoyed it because it was like practical philosophy, which is sort of like not a thing because most philosophy is not practical. And you can put it to use in practical ways, but a lot of it is kind of speculation. It's like speculative philosophy. It's thinking about different ethical principles. And then like with ethics might be arguably the most practical because you're talking about human action and choices you make and what that results in, and is that a moral good or moral evil. But a lot of other philosophy stuff, it's not super practical. And if you spend your days doing that, you're a philosopher, but you're probably not necessarily living in the real world. You might be. It depends. But you're either going to teach it or you're probably not going to use it. Like you're not thinking, most people aren't thinking about what Aristotle or Xenophon said thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago at least, unless you're teaching it or you're using them as a resource to prove a further point about something practical.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed his class on family and household specifically because of that, because he's quoting Xenophon and he's quoting Aristotle and he's quoting St. Thomas, but then he's talking about this is how you apply this to get your children to do their chores, or this is how you apply this when you're fighting with your wife about an important thing, or this is, so, and even, I don't think anyone in the class was married, but there were a few people that were dating and whatever. And so it was interesting how, some of the people who were dating were like kind of asking a question of, and you could tell they were asking about their relationship, or other people who were single were asking just very open, honest questions about marriage because they had no idea. And then I think there was a section, I don't know if it was family and household or friendship, probably family and household, where we talked about like contraception for a class, but like the philosophy of it, which I had never talked about. So yeah, there were just a lot of really like thought-provoking things he would say or do, and I think that might be the only notebook that I've kept. A lot of the other ones I just threw away, or maybe in storage somewhere. But that's one where I'm like, pretty much everything I wrote down in this class is like gold. Like,
yeah.
Almost everything he said that I thought was important enough to write down is still important.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that's what I love about philosophy and having learned again the frameworks of like teaching you how to think and teaching you how to ask the right questions is a skill set that you're going to be able to apply for the rest of your life. right? And I think what's so cool about family and household is it's teaching you, frameworks for the family and household, but also teaching you to ask the right questions about the family and household. And like you, I mean, there's some of the things I remember the most came from that class. To give you another example of one that my wife and I have talked about a lot is this idea that, Cutterback would say something like, fundamentally the household is focused on the flourishing of human beings. It's focused on the flourishing of the relationships of those human beings in the household. Additionally, to another kind of point he makes is like, when your children or your spouse or even yourself, I mean, you can have a household of one. So when your children, when your spouse are in your household, they are a part of your household. But the moment that, for example, they get married, your children get married, they have now exited your household. Things like that, like frameworks like that just really fundamentally change the way that you think about what you're trying to do as you craft and build your family.
Yeah.
It truly is life-changing.
Yeah, it's been really neat to see. I think he was already building up the LifeCraft site my freshman year, because it was originally his blog from Acorns to Bacon, and then it became this whole other behemoth. And he's got like tons of videos, stuff for wives, stuff for husbands, family stuff. He's putting out videos on like the goodness of gardening, all this agricultural stuff. So it's really exploded. I don't know how big his following is, but he's got so many resources there that I go back to time and again just to talk about. He actually recently gave, I guess it was last year now at this point, there's a pilgrimage. I think it's a 3-day pilgrimage in Oklahoma that starts at, I think it's St. Damian's Parish, and it goes to Clear Creek Monastery. And I don't know if he did the pilgrimage, but he came to the end of it, and it's on YouTube. I'll put it in the show notes, but he gave this really, really good reflection on manhood. It was like 30 minutes long, wasn't that long, but he just kind of outlined like the struggles that men have, the things that men have, or rather the duties that men have, and how regardless of whether you're single, married, religious, all of those things are true. And the thesis of it was how all men are called to fatherhood, even if you're never a biological father, and even if you're never a spiritual father, like even just a single guy living in the world, doing his job, even if he never gets married, is never a godfather, is never an uncle, never joins the religious life, still has this role of father to like protect and provide in some sense. And it's qualified based on your position in life. And I was like, wow, I guess I've heard that before, but I've never really heard it outlined that way. And that's such a powerful thing, because I think that, priests, we call them father and they have a very specific duty. And then dads, okay, we call them father and they have biological kids. But it's like, especially for single guys, maybe they want to be a father, they're discerning the religious life, but they shouldn't feel like they're at this weird in-between stage where they don't have a purpose. Like they still have a role as father, but what is that? And then he kind of went into like what that entails and the things you should be doing if you're either in that in-between stage, or that just is your role, is to be a single guy in the world. How do you witness Christ? How do you live a life of virtue? All those things that you would do in a different vocation. It's not a waste. Like you still have this role. What does that mean? Like, and it was, you probably heard this when Mr. Brown came on the podcast 2 episodes ago. He said, we were talking about cutback, I forget why, but he came up and he was like, something you should strive for is to have like the virtue, have the demeanor of John Cutterback. And I was like, okay, well, like, what does that mean? And he was like, well, he is probably the person, the only person that I would want at my deathbed. And I was like, that is such a weird thing to say. And he was like, but the goal is like, you want to be that. And Jordan Peterson talks about this too. Like, you want to be the guy that everyone wants at a funeral. Like you can show emotion, you can get emotional about the right things, but also you're the shoulder to cry on. You're going to make the decisions. You're going to, go combat that like angsty family member that no one really likes. Like you're going to be the person to step up and make sure things are okay. And I thought that was so interesting. I was like, what a goal to set for yourself. Like as a man, I want to be the person that my friends want at their deathbed over their parents or, next to their spouse. Like that's an extremely high bar, but it's awesome to think about like what you would need to do to get to that point. And that should be the goal. Like I want to be the person that if my friend is dying, that they make the call that I'm going to be the person to be there with them. Yeah.
Man, that
anyway,
is, that is
words of wisdom from Mr. Brown.
No, words of wisdom from Anthony Criste right there.
It's all transliterated.
That's amazing. Seriously,
but yeah, I thought that was really cool.
That really struck me. Like that's something I'm going to be thinking about a lot. Like seriously, what you just said, I mean, that is a really powerful lens to look at it through. I love that kind of stuff, like looking at life through a kind of lens, right? To help you gain a new perspective. And so what you just said, it's a different way of looking at, I've heard, many people talk about the concept of like, what do you want people to say at your funeral? And I have heard one of the most powerful things I've heard is what you want them to say. And really in the one sense, what the only thing you need them to say or would really, really hope that they say is that he was a good man with like, capital, bold, underline on good. Like he was a good man. The rest is just kind of descriptory. But good is the thing that defines you, right? And by good, it's like, obviously, like, did you love Christ? Did you love the people around you? Did you love your family? Did you give them attention? Did you give them present? I mean, all of those things come into that one word. But that's one lens, but I've never really thought about it from the lens of like, what kind of person would I need to be or become to be the kind of person that someone would say, I want that person at my deathbed? That is a different lens. And that's a powerful one to think about because in a way, it's like, it's not about you. Right. It's very much about others. So I love that. That is such a cool lens to look at it through. Yeah.
I've heard a few things about like, what would you want people to say like at your funeral? And I think like he was a good man is obviously like one of the top ones. Another one I heard, I don't know if it was a saint that said it, but something to the effect of like, he loved well. Because if you love well, if you are able to emulate Christ's perfect charity in the best way that you can, then you don't need anything else. Like you loved your family well, you did, your coworkers, your job, the people in your area. But it's like, at the end of the day, we can all 100% say with certainty he loved well. And like, that's what we're called to do. Like that, what else are you lacking?
Yeah. It's like that phrase. What saint is it that says, love Christ and then do whatever you want?
I think that's Saint Don. Is it John Bosco? I think it's John Bosco.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
There's actually this movement in Catholicism that we talked about a couple episodes ago that I think is so fascinating, and I think more people should be on board with, because there's like the Benedict option, right? Seal yourself off from the world, just live in your community, don't think about it. I think there's benefits to that. I think there's obviously some horrible things that are a consequence of that, because I think you should be in the world, just not of the world. But there's this movement, and I don't know if there's a specific face to this movement. I've just heard, maybe it's more of like a social media thing, but it's like the Boscoist movement, and it's essentially love God and then do whatever you want. Because if you're loving God and you're loving your neighbor, you're fulfilling those two commandments, you're not going to be sinning. And then if you are sinning, then you're not doing one of those two things right. And I think it what I like about it is that it puts this scrupulous, I guess would be one word, but non-anxious, you don't overthink things. It's just do the good thing and then everything else is fine. It's a really positive outlook on life rather than a list of don'ts.
Totally.
And this has been a criticism, I think, not just of me or by me, but a lot of people about like the, like chastity talks, right? This is what Jason Everett really like nails incredibly well, is that he's like, everyone gives a chastity talk about don't have sex before marriage. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't go too far. He's like, that's not helpful, because of course we know that that's the case. What should we do? Pray for your spouse. Like, be able to come home after a date and be able to look like your girlfriend's dad in the eye and be like, yeah, if you were in the car with us, I would have no regrets. Like that type of
that's so cool.
Like consolation that I did the right thing. And to me, that's way more powerful. And I think that's the same is true in spirituality, or even just in coaching, in training, in your work life. It's not helpful to say, don't do this list of things. We all know that the list of things, we all know that list of things that you shouldn't do. What should we do? And I think that's where coaching, fatherhood, really comes into play, is that guidance. Like, obviously I know I'm not supposed to kill people. I know I'm not supposed to steal, but what is charity? And like, how do I treat my neighbor well? And what does that look like practically? And that's where I think it's so powerful to be a good example, or to surround yourself with good examples, to be able to figure out what that even looks like.
Totally.
But anyway, I think to me that I've thought about that a lot. That movement of Catholicism, I think, is really fascinating because it's just a very, very positive outlook on, like, I think especially nowadays where you've got this whole divide with the uber traditional Catholic community, and you've got SSPX, and you've got charismatic people, and then you've got people who are like here in Front Royal, you've got a really solid Novus Ordo parish, and there's all this judgment and there's all this outside, and it's like, no, just, are you doing something wrong? Yes or no? If you are, stop doing it. And if you're doing something right, what's the good in that? And can you do it better? And if that means going to a different parish to do it better, or a different priest to do it better, then you should do that. And that's specific to your state in life. Otherwise, stop. Like, just then go to mass. Like, that's obviously more important than, is the liturgy 100% perfect, or do I like this priest's homily? So I think that just really simplifies it. And I think that would be helpful for people who struggle with scrupulosity to think about. Like, just don't sin, and then literally do whatever you want. Because if you're not sinning, whatever you're doing is good. And then you should enjoy it because it is good.
Right.
So
love it.
All right. We are back. Thanks for coming back. If you're not back, that's okay. It's been a long conversation, but we're going to keep going. And I've got a lot of things I want to talk about. We are still enjoying our Wild Turkey 101 Kentucky Straight Rye Whiskey. Bottle's getting a little lower, and the conversation's still flowing. So we're going to keep going. One thing I wanted to talk about that I mentioned right before the break was coaching. We've talked a little bit about coaching, but you coached the men's basketball team at Christendom. You were also involved with a program called Sports Vision that is still actively functioning here in Front Royal, which is a youth program for summer sports for kids. If you want to just speak a little bit about both of those things, coaching, the goods and the bads, and then what Sports Vision is, and then we can get into kids and sports and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, sports has been a huge part of my life, primarily basketball and soccer. Played a couple other sports growing up, but those were the two primary ones. And ultimately was blessed to be able to play those both at Christendom, which was cool. You know, not a lot of people get to play two sports in college. There's pros and cons to that. Like, I think there's a lot of, again, back to focus, what we were talking about earlier, I think there's a lot of power in becoming focused on one sport and getting really good at it and understanding how much it takes to become excellent at things. So, like, there's a lot of power in being good at one thing. But at Christendom at the same time, like, it was really cool to be able to play both basketball and soccer. So that was kind of my player journey. And then graduated Christendom 2016. And I believe it was like, I want to say it was literally fall of 2016. I graduated May, fall 2016. I'm pretty sure I was coaching, and I did 1 year of St. John's, which is the local kind of Catholic / homeschool basketball team. So some guys, local legends like Eli Jones, Andrew D'Andrea, Matt Brake, Gil Yergi, and many other amazing guys were on that team. Tons of family names you'd know. It was super fun to be able to coach them. And so I did 1 year of high school basketball, and then got the call from Christendom. They had a coaching spot open for the men's basketball team, and immediately took it. And that was a 7-year stretch then that I did at Christendom coaching men's basketball. This past year, after the season wrapped, I stepped away, mainly for two reasons. Number one, I had no upcoming seniors. So, it's always really hard to leave seniors, people coming into their senior year, and you were their coach for 3 years and you're stepping away. That's just a really challenging time to leave, an individual or a group of individuals. So it was kind of the right timing there. And then also two oldest boys, 7 and 6 years old. Sports are becoming a big part of their life. And so obviously want to be more present to them. But that 7-year stretch of coaching was amazing. And through some of those years, myself and a good buddy of mine, Joe Walsh, had run Sports Vision, which is like a local summer camp specifically focused on basketball, soccer, and volleyball. And yeah, it's just been an amazing experience to run that with him. He's kind of taken the reins there. But as a result, like, obviously sports has just been an enormous part of my life since as long as I can remember.
Do you think that the influence of sports has been primarily for good? And if so, what, obviously it's for good, but what were some of the maybe negative connotations that had, if any?
For me personally, or like, what do I see?
Yeah, I think just for you personally for right now. And then I want to get into just kids sports in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things, certainly sports require to be excellent then, they require a ton of time. So there's always got to be an evaluation of like, is this worth investing in? And there's a lot of factors there. Like, you know, that's a whole, you know, episode in of itself, right? Unpacking all of those things. But, you know, I guess for me, what I'm saying, one of the negatives is I said a huge yes to sports. The question is, what did I say no to that maybe would have had more impact on me in my life? Now, at this point in my life, I don't regret any decisions really that I've made in terms of choosing sports. I think they taught me a ton of powerful lessons. But that said, it's also like, but I don't really know what I said no to, right? So I think that's one potential concern, is that sports requires, especially to be excellent at them, a lot of time and focus and attention. And as a result, that requires that you say no to other things. Examples could be other clubs that you could have joined. It could be more time that you could have spent at home and with the family. It could be the ability to go hunting or to go camping or to go hiking. I mean, and I still did a lot of those things, but I'm saying, obviously you're putting a huge yes towards a certain area of your life. So that's kind of one big one. The other one, I think, is some of the environments that you're in. When I think about basketball, I was blessed growing up. So middle school, even before that, but like middle school and high school, I was in Asheville, North Carolina, with a homeschool organization called the Trailblazers. That was incredible for me, because what that meant was I was surrounded by people who were from primarily Christian-based households, had a deep faith life, and had a healthy perspective of sports versus the other important priorities in their life. So that was an incredible, you know, environment to grow up in. Not everybody gets that same setting, you know, to be able to play sports. And here's what I'm pointing to is like, you know, basketball. I mean, the reality is you look at kind of like who thrives, who succeeds in basketball. Like let's just call a spade. Like typically like the people that are really thriving at the highest levels of basketball have come from not necessarily the greatest backgrounds. That's the reality. That's probably true in a lot of sports, but I think in particular, basketball. I think soccer, you have a different vibe of people that are in soccer, pros and cons there. You know, typically I would say like travel sports, you got a little bit more like wealth, a little bit more middle upper class. Again, not always. I'm not trying to make like huge statements, but my point is certain sports have certain types of people that play them in general. And that can be a con, that can be a negative. That you're surrounding yourself in that environment. And again, I think what I'm pointing to with the Trailblazers is there was a little bit of a protective shell there, which was healthy. But, you know, had I been in another environment, I might have been exposed to a lot of things that maybe wouldn't have been good for me. Yeah,
it's something I've been thinking about the last couple of days. I had a conversation with my other co-host, Mark, over the weekend. Actually, we were at my other co-host Brian's daughter's baptism party, and as it goes, we were like, well, we could talk to everyone, or we could just hang out together. So we just hung out together, and they're in a new build, so we were admiring their new, you know, or it's his in-laws' house, and so we were kind of admiring their new house and talking about it because we're both, you know, have a construction background, and then we kind of got to talking about like homesteading, we got to talking about family, and so the conversation kind of ended up with homeschooling, pros and cons of homeschooling. And then it kind of the end of the conversation, we started talking about sports because for his background, he was homeschooled, and sports was his main, if not only, like social outlet. And he played with, I think there was a Christian or a homeschool group kind of similar to what you were talking about that he played with. And that was a great outlet for him because it was other people, but it wasn't just Catholic bubble. It was like, you know, expanding people who are Presbyterian or people who have slightly different views on Christianity, but he wasn't just stepping into this like world of drugs, right? It was like kind of protected, but not just Catholic. And then my experience was fairly similar. And I played basketball and soccer, but I did it almost exclusively in a Catholic context. And then my exposure to the outside world, so to speak, was all the teams we played were primarily Christian. We had a few Catholic competitors that we had games against, but most of them were Christian schools or military schools. But we were just talking about the differences, like what's the best option. And I don't know if we really came to a conclusion. I think a lot of it came down to each specific kid learns a different way. Each specific family does a different thing. And if you're a family who lives an hour from town, Monday, Wednesday, Friday games or practices might not be a good option for you because it's an hour of driving and you have to coordinate rides. But if you're someone that lives right next to the soccer field, well, that's a different story because you still have that time Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but you can walk to the soccer field. And then there's, again, other things at play. Do you go to a private school or a public school where there's a well-funded team that you're a part of? Well, you might have more opportunities because it's well-funded and there's, a stadium and there's like actual programming going on versus a homeschool or Christian group. You might be playing with really good people and really, virtuous people, but the competition sucks.
Yeah.
Like you don't play any good teams, or you're so terrible that you can never really be competitive against other teams. You can never go and win a championship and actually get that opportunity. So I don't think there really is a right answer, but one thing that we did talk about was travel sports. And I think the conclusion that we came to is like, if you have a little bit more money and you're a family that's fairly small, you have 2 or 3 kids, travel sports might be awesome because it takes you around the country. There's different tournaments you go to. Money's not an issue, so you can like treat the team out to dinner and you can kind of be the fun family. And then you get these opportunities and that might be like a college scholarship, or that could be professional depending on how good you are and how big the program is. But most of the time, if you're from a bigger family, or especially if you're from a family that doesn't have a lot of time or money or both, travel sports is probably a really bad idea because your whole family can't come. They can't really afford it. So it's kind of bankrupting the family in some sense. And you're gone every single weekend. And then that also factors into like your spiritual life and your, education. Just be curious on your thoughts on that. Like, what do you think there is a role for travel sports, and do sports need to be directed at, like, should you only put your kids in sports if the goal is the NFL or the goal is the NBA? Or do you think that there's like an in-between where, hey, look, you're not going to play professional ball, but we're still willing to make these sacrifices and we're still going to push you because at the very least it's a scholarship, or at the best it's a scholarship, and worst case scenario, you don't go to college and you still were really competitive in a sport and you learned a lot. Yeah. I don't know. But I'm curious of your thoughts on that, being from a athletic background and having kids that are probably starting, sports, and like what direction do you take that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll run with this thread, which is this. I think there are way too many parents who think that their kids are going to go to the NBA. That's the reality. And
is your kid tall and black? Okay, maybe rethink.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's way too many people I think that way, or think even like scholarship level. Mm-hmm. Like it is a select few that truly get a full ride to a place. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll start with that thread, and where I'm coming from is, I'll kind of take you back in my own life. I had a coach and a tremendous mentor through middle school and a little bit of JV. His name was Dr. Tom Bernard, out of Asheville, North Carolina. And he really, in a way, it's a strong statement, but there's a lot of truth to this. He was kind of like a second father to me, in the sense of like, he was kind of like a Yoda in your life. Like, this guy gave me a ton of wisdom, and he also challenged the heck out of me at many moments. And so, just an incredible mentor throughout my life. One of the things that he would often say, so we would have a lot of away games. I would often travel with him in his car with his 2 sons, and then usually 1 to 2 maybe 3 other players from the team riding with him. And without fail, if, like, let's say the car ride was 3 hours, maybe even 2, to go play another team, at least one of those hours, usually right after the first 30 minutes, would be some sort of conversation and sort of seminar or lecture about some topic of life. And literally it would range. It could be about communism. It could be about entrepreneurship. It could be about Christianity. It could be about having a family and raising children. It didn't matter. Like, it could be about anything, but he took that as an opportunity for him of, I'm investing a ton of time and energy into these kids. I'm going to use this time and energy to to be able to share some of my perspective in life with them, but also bring them into the conversation. I bring that up to say one of the topics that he sometimes would discuss is like, look, gentlemen, the reality is that percentages would say that not a single one of you in this car right now is going to the next level of the NBA. Furthermore, probably not a single one of you is going to go to like the D1 level. Maybe not even one of you is going to go to the D2 level. And I'm not saying that to discourage you. I'm saying that to either challenge you to take it to the next level or to recognize that sports is a vehicle for personal development. And I just appreciated that so much, right? And there's certainly like, I don't necessarily always appreciate it as he was saying it, but 2020 vision, looking at the past, boy, oh boy, there are a lot of parents out there who I think are encouraging their children to take it to that next level. Or also too, here's another thought for you. We need to invite, bumping on Front Rows Main Street. Tonight, yeah. That's pretty good stuff. Another thing that kind of blows my mind is just how seriously parents on the sideline treat their children's games.
Yeah.
To be just like totally blunt with you, sure. It's honestly kind of disturbing.
Oh yeah.
And gross. Like that's the reality. Like there's a lot of games I've been to, even within like Catholic settings, even within private schools locally, where I've seen how parents respond to the ref or how parents respond to the players on the field. And it's literally just viscerally shocking how loud they are, how much they're yelling at the ref, how much they're yelling at other players. And it's like, I just wonder if you could just show them almost game film of themselves. It's like, do you realize that you're behaving this way?
Do you think that they're trying to like live out some type of like athletic fantasy that they never had in their kids? And that's why they're so invested? Or maybe it's because they've invested so much money, they're upset that if any possibility that their kid doesn't get a scholarship is money out of their bank account. And so they're upset that X, Y, or Z is happening. I don't know what it is, but I feel like to your point, that happens a lot of times at a really low level. Like this isn't like D1 college teams. I'm sure there's the crazy mom at, a college football game or something. But most of the time at college football games, you see the whole fan section. They're all just super psyched. Like you're D1, like you're Notre Dame, you're playing this team and it's awesome. And they're just happy to be there. But where you see this like violence and really like, I don't know what it would be called, but like over parenting in some sense, where you're like yelling at the refs and cussing and like yelling at the other team's parents and stuff, is at like a 3-year-old soccer game. And you're like, this doesn't matter. Like if your kid is that talented, then they can move up in a league next year. But the fact that the ref is calling them on this yellow card or this thing probably means that they did it and you should just chill out. But it kind of makes the game, number one, makes it less fun to watch because you're like, what? Like stop disturbing the game. Let these little 3-year-olds play. But the second thing is you're like, grow up. Like, this is not a big game. Like obviously if there's a really bad call or someone gets hurt, you might boo, but to like be cussing the whole game or to be that emotionally invested, it doesn't seem healthy at all.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you get to that point. Like I have plenty of siblings that play soccer or play volleyball, play sports, and I'll go watch their games and half the time I'm like, oh, they scored. Great. Like I'll notice that they scored and I'll cheer, but I'm not yelling at the outcome. If anything, I'm yelling at them like my brother's like, oh, you do better. Like you suck.
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to get them to do better, but I'm not upset at the ref calling something or the other coach or anything. Like I don't know what that is, but it's very odd.
Well, I think to draw a little bit of a string here that I think is maybe helpful, like looking under this lens is, often when we talk about social media and some of the problems of social media, there's an indirectness, right? There's a detachedness from the other human being on the other side of the screen, right? And so, you see comment, it's like the algorithm literally feeds hate.
Yep. Yeah,
like
100%.
It's like, it's a known fact. Like when you post things that are controversial or create debate or create kind of like even like close to hate speech, it all of a sudden triggers that algorithm to like boost that post, right? And create even more of it. I think something similar is happening in sports. And it's, I don't know, like I wish I could speak a little bit honestly more like technically to like what exactly is happening there. I certainly think one component is, as you mentioned, parents wanting to live vicariously through their children. I think that's one huge component. I think secondly, you maybe see a little bit of like, sports is an interesting environment where like passion and aggression can come out in a way that's just not acceptable. Here's a good example I point to all the time, like even with my team, where you maybe have somehow in sports, it's often found acceptable for an opposing head coach to be absolutely belligerently screaming at a ref, like literally verbally berating them, telling them what an awful job they've done, potentially using expletives to describe that fact. Getting so close to them, it's physically uncomfortable. Body language that suggests that there's going to be like just the total next level of like human energy. And somehow that's like okay in sports. And frankly, as a ref, I would never be able to be a ref because I would never be able to put up with that.
I know. I would tee people up so often.
I would tee people up so quick. And I'd say that's like that. We will not play a game that way, and you will not treat me that way, and I will not treat you that way. But somehow that's like allowed and accepted in sports, and that's kind of crazy to me. So it's a setting that allows you to push to like the limits of aggression and tonality and noise levels, I mean, to be honest, as well. So it's really interesting from that lens. And parents, I think, push the same levels as coaches do or as players do. Is there's no real repercussion, right? Like how often have you actually seen a parent get thrown out of a game? Right. Very rare. Yeah. Though maybe they should actually be thrown out quite a bit more often, right? Yeah. And again, I can't really speak to it like super technically, but I can tell you what I see, and what I see is unhealthy. Yeah. It's unhealthy. It really is. And as a coach, I've not been perfect. There's no doubt about that. But I've really tried as a coach to be even keeled and level headed unless it gets to a point where I feel like my players are being treated truly unfairly, or I feel like maybe a coach or a ref is like completely out of line. And again, I've not been perfect in that, but I think the majority of my players who have, played under me or parents who have watched me and things like that, I am loud, like as a coach. Like, don't get me wrong. I think I've got a strong voice. I'm a pretty booming voice in a gym. I'm loud. And that can sometimes people perceive that as aggression. Like I've had that feedback. People are like, it seems like you yell a lot and like you're angry. But anybody who actually knows the game, hey,
3 for 3.
3 for 3. They're coming.
We got to start editing this out. It's getting to be a lot.
But anybody who like actually knows the game knows that I'm just literally trying to communicate to my players about a certain thing. There's no level of like, there's not anger. Yeah. Really towards them. The 98% of the time, I'm very level-headed towards refs, towards other coaches, towards the players. It takes a lot of discipline, I think is like the point. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm just saying it takes a lot
and
of
I
discipline.
think they're definitely, like everything, there's a mean between extremes. You can have the coach that's quiet on the sidelines, never says anything, and they're a good coach. And you can have the coach that's yelling, screaming, yelling expletives, and they can also be a good coach. But there is that sweet spot in the middle, and based on people I've talked to who have played for you, and then Jason Lockery was one of my high school coaches, Brian Fox, and I just remember thinking that they were such good coaches because they wouldn't yell and scream at the refs, and the other coach was, and you're like, wow, that coach looks unhinged. But then at the same time, if you get the ball and you're in a tight spot and you just hear this booming voice like timeout, and you're like, yes, he saw the play, he yelled timeout. Yep. We still have possession, we have a couple seconds, whatever the play was. And it was really nice to know that my coach isn't gonna, I don't have to worry about making my coach angry, because if I'm doing the wrong thing, he's just gonna sub me out. Yeah. He's not gonna like verbally like berate me in front of the entire audience or my entire team. But when push comes to shove, if there's a really bad call or there's a really extreme situation, he's going to yell and he's going to get loud. And it was really nice to know that like I was never worried about making my coaches angry, but I also knew that if there was a tight spot, they were going to yell timeout. They were going to get that full or 30-second timeout, or they would yell at the ref. Like one time we had a call in basketball. there was a tournament we were playing and we got a blarge called, which is a block and a charge. It's technically in the rule book. I don't think it's ever been called, but this ref called it. And I remember my coach just losing it and was like, what are you talking about? This has never been called. It clearly wasn't that. And all of us were like, thank you for yell. Like, it would look bad as the player to yell, but it's so nice to have the coach who is like kind of respectfully yelling and disagreeing. But then the ref was like, nope, that's my final call. And then he was like, okay, all right. And then he started talking about what play we were going to do.
Yeah.
And then that same game, the other team's coach lost it. He got a technical foul and he was sent out of the game.
Wow.
And it was just kind of wild because you're like, wow, our coach got angry, but he was able to rein it in and keep it, and the other coach lost it and then had to leave, and that wasn't good for his team, and we ended up winning.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, that's a rabbit hole of talking about like prudential coaching decisions.
It's a huge responsibility too. I think I've certainly learned a lot of lessons throughout coaching. One of which is, just like a player. I mean, here I'll just point straight to a scene. At Christendom basketball, one of my favorite things about coaching basketball, specifically at Christendom, is like a home game.
Yeah.
At a home game at Christendom,
totally.
You've got about 300 to 400 people in a very, very close setting, like very tight quarter gym. So the volume level is next level. I mean, it's as every bit as good as being at an NCAA March Madness game in the sense of like intensity and presence and like volume. It's just amazing to be inside a gymnasium with 300 to 400 people, like truly engaged in the game. So one of my favorite things there, and one of the other things I'm pointing to is like you are a witness on so many different levels that you don't even like most of the time obviously recognize. Many times I'll look over at our bench. I'm sorry, not our bench, but our stands. And there's a lot of local kids who play high school, middle school basketball. They're there to support the players that they look up to. They're also there watching me and watching the coaching staff and watching the bench. And it's like there are a lot of eyes on you. And that's not like a vanity thing. That's like a responsibility thing where it's an incredible witness to be disciplined, to be composed, to be virtuous in those settings that are very energy charged, right? So it's an awesome responsibility to be a coach. You just have so much influence over kids. This past season, I'll kind of say a few brief words about it. This past season, in particular, was the most challenging season I've ever had as a coach. And in large part, that was because of the commitment from myself as well as the players both ways towards success on the season and towards true excellence. And so, for example, I think a lot of times, like even you look at like Christendom basketball and you think to yourself like, oh, okay, like this is like below D3 level. They probably practice for like an hour and a half per week and they probably just kind of like roll up to games and, they do the thing and they play. It's like, no, like that's not really what is required of excellence. It's, for example, it's 2-hour practices, outside of which the players are showing up, let's say 15 to 30 minutes early to stretch, to dribble, to shoot, to prepare themselves for an excellent practice. 10 minutes of cool down, one-on-one conversations that might happen after that practice. Additionally, you look at like game film and game prep for the upcoming opponent that you're playing. Typically, the people engaged in game film prep at a minimum are spending 2 hours, maybe upwards of 4 hours to prep for the game film that the team will watch. The team then watches that for 1 to 2 hours. They read over scouting reports on the drive there. They read over scouting reports in the locker room. And you get my point. It's like and on and on and on. And I didn't mention all of the weight room sessions that take to be truly excellent, even at a low D3 level, requires a tremendous amount of discipline and effort. And so I think kind of full circle, sports is just this, again, great vehicle for personal development. And it's also, again, a great vehicle for personal virtue.
Yeah. As a father, you have your kids that are, middle school age, they'll be high school age, college age. Have your views on sports changed at all or have been strengthened by coaching? And the reason I ask that is I think if you come from a academic background, maybe you didn't play sports, school was a priority, you went to a good college, and now you work in academia, sports are like kind of the enemy, right? Like they take students out of the classroom, that's distracting your mind on the weekend. You're not getting your papers done. Or on the, kind of on the flip side of that, if you're from a sports family, sports is everything. And you're talking about any number of sports. It doesn't even have to be like basketball. It could be basketball, soccer, football, rugby, and then also all the different levels of that, high school, college, professional, and then you go into soccer, which is all the different countries. That can be super time consuming, and then academics can kind of take a back burner. But obviously there's a balance there. And I think not that everyone needs to go to college and be academic, and not that everyone needs to play sports and be competitive. But as a dad, like how do you think or I guess what would be your words of advice to people who are in your situation, or maybe even 10 years down the road, and they've got kids that are considering college? Like how do you make it clear to them that we need to prioritize sports? If you're going to be competitive, I want you to go to practice. I want you to try out for the team, have the gear, all that stuff. But also you're going to college. Maybe it's not a state school, but you still need to be academic. How do you kind of convey that you need to balance those things? And also, I guess the follow-up question to that would be, do you see a benefit in prioritizing sports, maybe at the kind of harming academics a little bit in the overall outcome? Because, if you prioritize academics and you're valedictorian, but you never played basketball, well, maybe you're valedictorian and you get a great job, but you never had that bonding with the basketball team. But on the flip side, if you never played basketball, like you're missing out on all that stuff. But
Totally.
There's kind of all these mathematical things you're trying to figure out, and maybe it's just person dependent. But it does seem like maybe there's a right way to think about it. Like why am I actually going to college, right? Like if you're going to a state school, you're probably going there to play sports and play at a high level that's well funded. But if you're going to Christendom, you're not necessarily going there for sports, although if you can get a scholarship, that's great. But if you're going to a Catholic liberal arts school, sports really shouldn't be the priority, even though you can prioritize them to a degree. Yeah. But yeah, I guess I'm just curious what your thoughts are, having gone to Christendom, but also played competitively and coached. How do those two things mesh, and do you sacrifice one for the other, or is there like a good in between?
Yeah. Yeah. Here's what comes to mind for me. This is a little bit, I'm being a little bit oversimplifying things, but I think of somebody like Thomas Aquinas, just a genius when it comes to philosophy and theology. On the flip side, you have a carpenter who is the greatest person in the world. Mm-hmm. And so that's a little bit of an oversimplification. But my point is, there's a lot of vehicles, I think, in life that can help you to become a saint. And ultimately that's the goal, right? Is to become a saint. And the path that each person is going to go is going to necessarily look different. And I think that's what I'm pointing to there, is where, it really is like a simple answer of it just depends. It depends on the kid. I think one of the greatest challenges in parenting is the ability to take true interest in what your child sees as the vehicle and support them in that, especially if that vehicle does not align with your background. So example, let's say that for me, sports has been a massive part of my life. For my wife, Mary, sports has been a massive part of our life. What if we have a child who, for whatever reason, whether it's a class they take or a teacher that they had or a mentor or a friend, all of a sudden their passion becomes construction, building, carpentry, trades. I don't have a ton of strong background in that. It's going to be really difficult for me to support them in that passion and in that project from a quote unquote background or experience perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the question is, can I do it? Can I support them? Can I surround them with people who will encourage and support them in that? Another example would be maybe they're huge in math and science. Again, I don't mind math. My wife doesn't mind math, but that's not our strong suit, is creating science projects. What if we have a child that all of a sudden is incredibly engaged in technology and science and wants to do that? That, I think, is one of the biggest challenges, is supporting your child in the things that really interest them. And they're going to likely use as a vehicle for personal growth, spiritual growth, mental growth, the whole nine.
Yeah. Do you see that role of support being kind of a collaboration of husband and wife, or do you see that it breaking down where the wife kind of has a specific nurturing, supportive role, and the father has more of a, I'm going to push you to be better, even if it's not the thing that I enjoy or I'm familiar with. I'm going to research it. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to talk to someone who knows that. I'm going to make it happen. Like, I guess in a sense those can be combined, but do you see that as like almost two different things? Because I have a baby girl and when I think about things that she might want to do, like, honestly, most of the things she wants to do probably won't be the things that I'm interested in. Like my wife teaches a ballet class. She'll probably do that. I have no background in ballet. I have no background in...
Not yet.
Trying really hard to not become a part of that world. But I see my role in that is, okay, well, you have practice. Well, you need the shoes. You need the dress. We're going to build a stage. I'll film the productions. Like, I can step up and do things that I'm comfortable with, or at least I can make work, even though my sisters didn't do ballet, although they are now, but they didn't do ballet, and I'm not from a background of like dance or production. That's not where I came from, but I can make it work. So I kind of see my role as like, what are you doing? How can I make that happen? Whereas it seems like the mother's role almost is like helping the child figure out what that thing is. Whereas the dad is more like, we're going to make it happen. Like kind of an active, almost like making phone calls type role. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I'll say this with humility. I think I'm living that live time. And so what I mean by that is my oldest is 7. The next one is 6. And so like that's the upper boundary of where I'm at. And from what I've kind of heard and taken from others, it seems like up to the ballpark of maybe 4, 5, 6 years old, a child is really, really dependent on, especially their mother, for that nurturing, loving care, and all of the different variations of that take place within the household. Maybe around 6, 7, 8 years old, they start to, maybe lean towards their father a little bit more. But again, I'm speaking a little bit like less technically, less precise, and just more of like, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm experiencing is that. And I see that in my oldest in Henry.
Okay.
He's starting to become more of like what you described, which is he's seeking to like get good at things. He's really seeking for what's going to be that vehicle for me. So yeah, I agree with you though. I think like what you're saying with your daughter, it's like that's another interesting challenge. It's like for a man, for a husband, your daughter, like what are the things that she's going to be passionate about, and are you going to be able to connect with her on those things? I mean, that's a real challenge,
Yeah. Because I think with boys, like I did sports when I was younger, so I can do sports. Like I can go to soccer games, I can go to basketball games. I kind of understand the lingo a little bit. I understand most of the rules. If not, I can figure it out. But if they're super interested in like music, like, oh, my son wants to play piano. Okay, well, that's not my background, but I guess I can figure that out or find money to pay for lessons or something. But even still, that role is like, okay, decide what you want to do, and then I'll make it happen.
Yeah.
Which I think especially for a boy, it's like, okay, but I can drive them to be better. Like I can start involving them in things that I'm interested in. Even if they don't really like it, it's still a good thing for them to do. Like just running errands, changing oil, like just kind of basic things. Like I'm just going to teach them how to do what I do. But with daughters, it's kind of a totally different ballgame, because you do want them to be independent. You do want them to like be self-aware, know how to do things. But there is kind of this either disconnect or like distance where it kind of feels uncomfortable, but I think it's okay. Like, yeah, we don't enjoy the same things, but that's okay. Like, and what you're doing is awesome, and I want to help you do whatever thing you're doing, whether that's dance or, your princess dress up or whatever. Like, that's not my thing, but also I don't want you to feel unsafe or like that it's pointless. Like, I want you to know that you are the center of what I'm doing, regardless of what that thing is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of fascinating how that supportive role kind of plays out with different personalities, and also boys and girls too.
Big time. On that note, here's something that like really, I think about this a lot, is I am really grateful. So like, again, back to my personal life, just to give some example and some frame of reference, I am so grateful to my dad for the things that he really was able to, I think, connect with me on, or like show me the way on. But I'm also grateful to him that he had, I think, the the sight, the vision to be able to connect me to communities or to different like extracurriculars or to different like environments where the things that he necessarily wasn't like amazing at, those people, those environments could help me with. So again, a couple of practical examples, like my dad being a teacher. He gave me a love of learning that is irreplaceable. The guy reads more books than any other person I know. Not to say that it's not like a measuring contest, but just like he is an avid reader. He taught himself Latin. He taught himself history. He taught himself English. He taught himself, like, the guy is just a lifelong learner. It's incredible. That is an incredible gift. One of the books that he recommended me at an early age was the autobiography of a autodidact. Autodidact being that means a self-learner, somebody who's self-taught. And basically the principle behind being an autodidact is like anything you want to learn, like go learn it, go read books about it, go study it. And what a powerful principle to teach. And it's almost like another way of saying that is like entrepreneurship. It's like, you want to go create something, like go get it. Same thing with learning. It's like, you want to learn something, like open your mind, go find the resources and go get it. And so just incredibly grateful to him for that. There's a number of other things I'm grateful for, but all of that to say, there were also things like, my dad, let's talk, for example, like kind of like handyman level. He's actually a pretty good handyman. He ran a bed and breakfast for many years. The phrase and motto in the Minick household with our bed and breakfast was, when something broke, we would say, well, it's better than it was. And, a good example of that is like my dad and my uncle, at one point, there was a leaky pipe. They're looking at this like tiny little trickle coming out of the leaky pipe. Bazooka gum. I'm talking about bazooka gum.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Have you ever chewed it?
No.
It's literally like mortar. It's like concrete. Like you chew it for like 5 bites, the taste disappears and it turns into straight concrete in your mouth. Okay. And so they like chewed it. And then my uncle just sticks some like bazooka gum like on the pipe, and literally that stayed,
leak is gone.
Like stayed for 10 to 20 years. I mean, just like, so like the phrase in the Minick household was like, well, it's better than it was. So I didn't learn necessarily like quote unquote, like how to tie knots, how to like build structures, etc. Where did I learn that? The Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts was a huge environment for me to learn that. And there's a lot of, not good stuff that has happened with the Boy Scouts recently, but the troop that I was in was incredible. My point is, I think that with your children, that's like, that as a parent is the ultimate, like, I think through a coach's lens in a way, right? So with my child, I'm like, can I give to them what is needed for them to be obviously a saint, but also just like flourish as a human being? If the answer is no, where can I help them find that? Where can I help them grow?
Yeah. And I think that it seems to me to be the first step, because if you're trying to approach fatherhood or parenthood in this is what I think the best life is, this is the best church, this is the best school, this is the best sport, and I'm going to instill that in all my kids. Maybe you're successful, maybe you're very influential, maybe your kids are all very obedient and they do those things, but most likely you're going to have a rambunctious child or two. They're going to want to do something different. And I think that a lot of failure that I see, and this is from the outside, so I don't know the interior conversation, but it does seem like some parents kind of come up with this standard, this template of what it means to be a good person. Yeah. And then their kid says, hey, I want to do this instead. And then they're like, okay, either we're cutting you off or we don't know how to support you. So you're kind of cutting yourself off. And then that's where it ends, rather than, oh, okay, well, we haven't really been into politics as a family. We've been a sports family, but I do know someone in politics. And if you want to run for local government, we're going to put signs out in people's yards and knock doors. Like, we're going to do that because we're family, and we're going to support you in this thing. Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, I feel like I do see it quite a good bit that, big families, and maybe it's just for a lack of time or lack of energy, but it seems like their kids kind of want to go do other things and they're not really supported. But I think it does go both ways. Like, if you're a kid and you're kind of going off the beaten path, then maybe you don't have that support, and that's just a decision you make. So, one thing I wanted to ask, kind of as we were talking about, we've been talking about like the goodness of suffering and family. I wondered if you could speak, and you can get as detailed or not detailed as you want, but just about marriage, raising kids, and then like suffering and how that affects your kids or your marriage or the community, but also how to get through that and what that means practically, just from a, again, doesn't have to be super specific. It can be, but like, yeah, when suffering comes up, how do you deal with that? How do you continue to lead your family in the direction of holiness without compromising on just things that need to get done and not getting bogged down in that suffering?
Yeah. So a huge, and we spoke about this before the podcast in a sense, and very happy to talk about this. It's been a huge part of our life, like just to sort of say it straight up.
Yeah.
From a suffering standpoint, our first child, Vincent, passed away due to a delay in delivery. So full term, operating table, C-section, emergency C-section kind of environment, and passed away due to a delay in delivery. And so obviously, you just never imagine that, of course, for your first experience, never in your wildest dreams. And, you never expect that, but that was our journey. What I will say is it's been kind of wild how many people have honestly had very similar stories. You experience something like that, you think like, man, are we the only ones? And then over the course of months and years, you realize like, oh wow, like we're absolutely not the only ones. Yeah. There are many people who have experienced, whether it's almost the exact same story or something very similar. There are many people in your boat. And I think, quick side note, that's kind of a crazy thing too, where when early on, Mary and I, when that had happened, when Vincent passed away and we were kind of like mourning and grieving and going through that experience, we just very quickly made the decision. I can't honestly remember whether it was like God guiding us to this or whether this was maybe from the wisdom from somebody else or from a letter that we received or something like that. But very early on, we just made the decision of like, we will not play the comparison game. We won't look at our pain and our suffering and our experience and compare it to anybody else's. Like, as a direct example, we won't look at, hey, we had a full-term child who passed away, and compare that as if that's somehow greater pain or lesser pain than somebody who has experienced a miscarriage. It just doesn't matter. Like right. There's no value in comparing it in terms of pain. So that was a really powerful distinction of kind of almost like for ourselves, like setting boundaries in that process and that mourning and that grieving. But it's wild. Like God places different, again, sufferings, trials in your life. The great positive that has come from Vincent and his passing away is that there is a full confidence that he is in heaven and that he is a saint. And so like, what a powerful thing for us to experience. Like we truly have a saint in heaven, Saint Vincent, that we pray to every single day, at dinner and at bedtime and even in the morning sometimes. And like, just what a wild experience. What a wild gift to be able to give for us, for Mary and I, and also for our children, right? That like, hey, your oldest sibling is a saint in heaven and he's praying for you and like watching out for you.
Yeah, that's the bar.
Day.
Yeah.
It's like, there you go. Right. I mean, like,
yeah.
And so we remind our kids, Henry and Theo and Lydia and Freddie, we remind them often that it's like, you have a brother. His name is Vincent. His photos are on the wall. Like, he truly is your brother and he truly is a saint and he's watching out for you. And like, the goal is, it's like, we say this a lot to our kids. Like, we're like, what's the goal, guys? We'll be in a car ride. What's the goal, guys? And they'll get fired up and they're like, to be a saint. Nice. And like, where are we going? Like, we're going to heaven. Like, this is the goal. Awesome. This is what we're about. So yeah. It's like kind of one of those things, like it is what it is. It happened. And so you just take the best that you possibly can from it. I appreciate any follow-up questions you have to that, just to help me kind of almost like clarify. But it has just been such a big part of our life. But
I definitely have a couple follow-up questions. But the first thing I want to say is just a comment on, I think that's really important to say, we're not going to play the comparison game, because I think that is kind of the first, I don't know if it's a roadblock, but kind of the first thing that comes up when you experience loss, right? You lose a parent. Why was it me? Why was it so young? Why was why didn't they finish their will? Why didn't, whatever. It's all these questions of why am I in this bad situation? But I think it's in some sense worse when you lose a child, whether full term. I mean, again, this goes back to the comparison game. Like, is it worse to lose a full term child? Well, you got to see them baptized, they're a saint. But also on the flip side, it's worse because you got to see them, you got to hold them, and then they passed away. Then you have those, couples who miscarry early where they never got to see, never got to hold. But also there's kind of it almost seems easier in a sense if you do the comparison game because, well, they never got attached emotionally.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that you're right. Like, I think that is the first step is don't look at other people. Don't think about how your situation is better or worse. Just look at the reality of this is what happened and this is the best way that it came about. If they weren't born, then baptism of desire, I'm sure they're okay. We'll pray for them. If they were born and they weren't baptized, again, baptism of desire, hey, let's be grateful that we got a few hours or a few days with them. Or if you had, someone who had their baby and they had them for several months, of course it's tragic and horrible, but at least we had that time with them rather than how come my friend had a baby at the same time and their baby's totally fine and ours passed away. Because that's the road to division, separation, jealousy, all of those things kind of set in if you approach it with the wrong mindset.
Totally.
So I think that is a really important thing. And that's definitely easier said than done. My wife and I, our first baby, we miscarried. It was pretty early on. But there were kind of those feelings of like, I don't really feel sad because the baby wasn't born. I don't really feel an emotional connection, like for me.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, well, for my wife, it's probably more because there was a baby. It was our first baby. And then that's just gone. And then there's almost a sadness that we never got to meet them. It's not a sadness that we met them and then they were taken away. Totally. It's a sadness that we never got to meet them. And then was it a boy or a girl? We don't know. Do we pray to them? Do we name them? Like there's all these kind of interesting, terrible things that set in that at the end of the day sort of don't matter. But if you don't figure it out, then you're just kind of emotionally wrecked. You don't really know what to do. Yeah. There's no path forward.
Yeah.
So I think that is important. Like step one, don't compare it to other people's sufferings. Find a positive that's there, and then figure out a way to move on and not move on too quickly. Because I think a lot of times, especially with miscarriage, people just say, well, the baby wasn't born. Hopefully it's baptism of desire. Hopefully they're good. We're not going to name them. We're not going to move on. And I'm not saying you need to name them necessarily, but they just kind of move on. And I think it's good to have that mourning period and good to do something about it. It doesn't need to be naming them. It doesn't need to be like celebrating their death day or their feast day or whatever, but like come up with something where you don't forget them and you can kind of have closure. I think that's the first step.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Well, yeah. Just to add on to that, like for Mary and I, one of the things that it took some time, and I'm sure there are many who can feel this experience or have gone through this, but like you just said with your wife, husband and wife will mourn probably in different ways.
Yeah. And
with Vincent, it was like, just to get like very literal for a second. And I think, again, this will really resonate. Like Mary, and I get it, and she should have, and it's like awesome. And it's right. Like she looked at photos of Vincent for months and months and months and months. Yeah. Like middle of the night, like scrolling through a whole slideshow of start to finish, like every photo captured of the entire experience.
Yeah.
And I get it, and it makes sense. For me, that was not my experience, you know what I mean? And so for me, it's like there was almost a friction for a small period of time where she was a little bit like trying to understand me, but like struggling too. And I was trying to understand her, but struggling too. And so the friction was, she's looking at it like, why aren't you looking at slideshows? Why aren't you like reliving this experience every single day? Like I carried him with me for 9 months. He was a part of me. Now just that literal, total, visceral, physical, total connection. And on the flip side, for me, it's like, I love him. And yet in the one sense, like, yeah, but I didn't know him for 9 months. He wasn't a part of literally my body, so it's just really like that stuff is powerful and understand that with husband and wife, you have to have a true consideration for the other, true tenderness, a true care to understand where the other is coming from. And the emotional response may not be the same not even like close, to the same. I mean, there's never like the reality is there's never a time where I'm like, man, I'm going to like scroll through like all 300 photos of the slideshow. That doesn't mean I didn't love him.
Sure.
And that I love him and that I pray to him every single day and think, you know what I mean? But it's just a different experience that you have. And I think that's a huge part of the journey of marriage is understanding just the other, in the marriage.
I remember my mom, I think it was her. Yeah, it was her last child. She miscarried. I don't remember how far along she was, but it wasn't super early. I don't think it wasn't like at stillborn level, but it was fairly far along, maybe halfway or something. And I remember we made like a little, burial ground in the backyard, and we got a little like cross and everything. And that was like, okay, that's where our sister's buried, even though we didn't know her. We didn't really even know if it was a girl, but that was just kind of what mom thought. So we just went with that. And I remember there was a parishioner at the parish who reached out because they had also miscarried. I want to say a bit further along, maybe it was even a stillborn. And it just really moved me because I remember they reached out to my parents and were like, and he's the guy was a lawyer. And so he was like, here are 10 things that like we found helpful. And it was very systematized, but he was like, if it's not helpful, don't read it. And if it's helpful, I'm happy to help. And that was all it was. And we didn't know them super well. I used to mow his lawn back in the day or something. So there was a little bit of a connection. But I remember I think my dad forwarded me that email, and it was really beautiful because it was like kind of going through the stages of like, make sure husband and wife are on the same level. Make sure you talk to a priest. If you have kids, talk to your kids about how we're going to approach this. Like, are we naming them? Are we praying to them? Mm-hmm. Was it too early? And we're just going to say, hey, there was a miscarriage, and we're not going to like pick a gender, like kind of going through the different steps all the way up until I think step 9 or 10 was like, it wasn't really steps, but just bullet points. Was like, here's who to contact if you need like a child casket. Here's who to contact if you need this, because we went through all this and we don't want you to have to like stress about it. And I was like, wow, that is incredibly cool that you are obviously going through a hard time yourself, but you're willing to kind of give my parents like the resources that you had. And if it's not helpful, you're not going to be offended. And if it is helpful, you'll probably never know. But the fact that you're willing to kind of be that vulnerable and be like, hey, we kind of went through the same thing. If you need a casket for your baby, here's who you should talk to. Yeah. Because no one wants to do that Google search, and no one wants to talk to whoever. Hey, Jim down at wherever will give you a really good, situation. He's going to set you up. You can pick a color. Like, he's very flexible. Like just the fact that he was able to kind of take that load off my parents' mind. And I obviously the baby wasn't as far along as theirs, so I don't think that they went all the way through. But it just made me think like, wow, there are other people. Like, obviously there's people who can't have kids. And so there's that struggle, or there's people that have adopted kids, and that's a separate struggle. But even within the realm of families who can have kids, then you have miscarriage, you have stillborn, you have babies who are born and then pass away. And there's all of this kind of emotional turmoil. And I think a lot of people don't know how to navigate it. And so I think that the fact that you have a big community where people could say, hey, we went through the same thing. This is what we did. Hope it's helpful. We're going to cater a dinner for you. We're going to bring you meals. We're going to set up a meal train. All of that is kind of part of this bigger picture of just like the Catholic community, or even just a Christian community, of dealing with hardship and dealing with suffering. Yeah. And I think that Catholics specifically tend to do it very well. Like the Irish funeral, right? Where everyone's like drinking and telling funny stories about the person who died. Like, that is the way to have a funeral. Yeah. You don't have a funeral where no one shows up and you go home alone and you're sad. Yeah. You go to a funeral where all of their friends and family are there. Everyone's there, proud of their grandpa, proud of their grandma, proud of their aunt and uncle, their parents, whoever, drinking, having a good time, celebrating the life, and saying, hey, they got last rites, and like, hopefully they're in a better place. We're going to keep praying for them. Yeah. That is obviously way better. Anyway, kind of a long way of just saying it's really powerful to see couples who have gone through this horrible stuff and then come out on the other side better, stronger, and are saying, hey, we're here if you need us. We went through the same thing. Yeah. And like, I don't know if you've been able to have that experience, but presumably you have, at least with people who have like miscarried, and say, hey, we kind of went through the same thing. This is the priest we talked to. This is a book we read. Even if it's just little things, like, that's immensely helpful.
No.
Probably far beyond what you'll ever know in this life, you know?
Absolutely. And, you know, a couple of things that come to mind there. The first one is, it was interesting as it first, when that happened with Vincent, when he passed away, I couldn't give you the stat. I couldn't tell you where I read it, but you know, I'm pretty sure it's a pretty commonly found, a commonly known stat of when a married couple experiences child loss, the number of marriages that result in divorce when a married couple experiences child loss. I don't know what the number is. You could do a quick
Google
it's
high,
search.
right?
It's very high.
Yeah.
Like
75% plus.
Somewhere up there. Like it's a shockingly high percentage.
Wow.
And again, I don't know whether this was just God speaking to us in prayer or somebody kind of like helping to coach us towards this, but just very early on in the experience, in the aftermath after Vincent, it was like for the both of us, we just had a conversation and we had like a commitment about like, that will not be us. And not from a pride place, not like, oh, we're not going to be a part of the 75%. It was just more of like, no, like what a selfish act that would be to split from it. Now, again, I say that with grace of like, for people who have gone through that or experienced that, there's a lot of nuances, a lot of trials, a lot of tribulations. But I'm just saying for Mary and I, it was not a divide. It literally was a bond that brought us together. Like it was just a commitment of like, we will have patience with one another. Yeah. We will understand how each other is mourning through this. We will totally hold fast to each other through this experience and through this pain. I mean, just the whole of it, you know? So that's one thing that definitely comes to mind is that, I think another is, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but like, again, I think God works in providential, mysterious ways. My mother had also passed away when I was 10. So I was young when she passed away, brain aneurysm, unexpected. Saw her the night before. She came home from a book club, had a headache. I went to bed. Next thing I know, in the morning, she was, I thought, sick with like a serious flu. And the long and short of it is, that was around like 9-10 a.m. I thought like, oh, she's sick. My dad had gone to go teach, gone to class. My brother and I were homeschooled. We're at home. Next thing I know, around mid-afternoon, we go up and we find mom, like, and there you go. And so it was a rush to the hospital, et cetera. And obviously the aftermath takes place. But all of that to say, it's like I'm 10 years old at the time or creeping up on 10 years old. That again was another big life moment where like, these are like turning moments in life where you either say like, I'm a victim, or you say like, no, like I'm going to take total ownership and God is placing this in my life. And I think that was the first big one. And I think, again, providentially, God puts those moments in your life and helps you to fight through them. And then with Vincent, it was like the same thing. It was just like, man, this is so tough, but this is going to be a great experience, a great witness through it all. And it absolutely has been. The last thing I'll share on this, at our wedding, Jack Hoffbauer, shout out to Jack Hoffbauer, by the way, recently went to his wedding. He's one of the few, if maybe only groom that I've ever seen give a speech at his own wedding, besides me.
I gave one, but it was like at the end of the night.
Man,
so
right. That's good stuff.
It was mostly just thanking people for coming. So.
Yeah, there you go. So at my wedding, I got the microphone for a quick second. I just truly thanked everyone. I'm like, thank you so much for being here. I know so many of you have traveled from so far away. This is probably one of the only moments in our lives where all of the most important people will be in one room. All the most important people to Mary and I will be in one room together. Yeah. Next to our funeral. Unfortunately, and yet in divine providence, I was wrong about that. The next moment was Vincent's funeral. And that was a powerful moment where it's like, wow, I didn't see that one coming. Yeah. But all those same people are there at Vincent's funeral. But boy, oh boy, did it touch people's lives. And of course, especially our own, but especially the people at Vincent's funeral. Just seeing that and seeing that witness. And maybe the last thing I'll add is like I saw a similar thing happen with actually John and Chana's in that funeral. That is truly like one of the most touched moments I've ever had through there. And again, it's that shared pain, that shared suffering that brings people together. So,
yeah, I think, I remember watching the video that came out with him at the court case with the guy who was involved in that incident. And I just remember thinking the whole time, like, he's handling this remarkably well. He's still keeping his composure. He's still speaking well. He's still like doing this perfectly. And I don't think I could ever do that. Like, I hope that I could.
Totally.
But like, if I was in the same situation, I don't know if I could look that person in the eye, talk to the courtroom, see my wife there, whatever, and be able to handle myself with the same clarity and the same like composure, the same outlook on life. Maybe, and hopefully, obviously I hope that never happens to me, but if it did, I hope that I could do it just 10% of what he did, right? And
I share, obviously recognize this will probably go live, and that's okay. And love John, love his family, and I share that just as a quick example. I just kind of want to highlight that, this is life. Like, this stuff happens, and the more that you go through life, the more you realize that this stuff happens, and that's honestly as tough as it is, it's a part of the layers of life. Like, the pain and the suffering is a part of the layers of life. And I've seen so many fruits come. And again, I'm not trying to overly talk about like his family, but like, I've seen so many fruits in the children and his family, and then him and his wife. Yeah. But back to like, kind of like the side that I feel more comfortable talking about. It's like, I've seen so many fruits come from our side with Mary and I, and our marriage and our kids and the family and the community around us. So, I guess really, again, grateful for giving the environment to be able to speak about it, because it's been such a big part of our lives, but just such a powerful witness.
Yeah, something that I always go back to, I don't know who said it. I assume that a saint said it, but I feel like it's kind of one of those things that Catholics just talk about all the time. But the fact that God always brings good out of evil is a really comforting thing, because you can see an evil thing and you can say, wow, that bombing was terrible. That terrorism thing was terrible. The child dying early was terrible. Someone shooting someone else was terrible. All these things are terrible. And then 6 months later, you realize, oh my gosh, that great thing happened. Or maybe it's something you'll never realize, but the fact that God in his providence allows evil to happen. And despite that, he can still make all of this goodness blossom from that. He can bring people to convert. And I see that in my own life. Like in the last 5 years, all 4 of my grandparents have died, just kind of one by one, staggered out a little bit. But at my grandpa on my dad's side, he was the first one to pass away. And he had a couple of my aunts and uncles aren't practicing. And one of my aunts, because of the witness of him, because of the family praying for him at his deathbed, all that stuff, like went into the other room either shortly after or shortly before he passed away and went to confession for the first time in like 20 years.
Wow. And
so you see things like that and you're like, I never would have thought that grandpa passing away would have caused an aunt to go to confession. Like why that math doesn't make sense. Like why would a death equal I want to go to confession? I have no idea. I would have never thought that. But now that aunt is back in the church and practicing. You're like, okay, well, that's not to say that his death was a good thing, but his death clearly was meant to happen at that time, and it also had these good effects, and more good effects than probably most of us realize in the family, right? And the same thing with the other grandparents. Like, oh, their death brought this suffering and this sadness, but then it also brings this unison and this this clarity in some sense, because then people start thinking about their own death. They start thinking about their own relationships with their siblings or their kids, and it causes these other things to spark up that were kind of dormant before. So I think it's just really important to think about in the moment. That's not helpful, but in the aftermath, looking back in hindsight, you say, wow, like I would have never been able to plan that, but the way that it happened was perfect. Yeah. And obviously only God could do that, One thing I want to ask you before I let you go, because I don't want to keep you too late. I try to ask this question of all of my guests. There have been a few good answers. Most of them have been not great, but that's okay. So here's the challenge.
No pressure.
What is something that you have changed your mind on either recently or just in your life, something big that like you grew up thinking, or in the last like 5 to 10 years, you were like, yeah, I'm going to do X. And then in the last 5 to 10 years, or even recently, have realized that's 100% wrong and I'm never doing that. But it was like a big thing, like almost a core belief. If it's not quite that level, it could be something lower, but just something that you really were like, wow, I always thought this, and now I think kind of the opposite, and here's why.
That is a great question. I actually heard one of your podcasts where you asked that.
Oh man, people are gonna, bummer. But I'll ask a better follow up then.
No. But
so you thought about this?
I should have thought about it more. Is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. No, that is great. This one actually is. I'll share something there, which comes to mind, which is. This is a part of the podcast we have not really touched on a whole lot.
Sure.
But I'll say this, and I wish this was a little bit more like spiritual or philosophical, but it is what it is, and I think it's valuable. I think growing up for me, a little bit of like the from a business perspective or an entrepreneurial perspective, I think there's growing up, not saying my dad wasn't, by the way, my dad was very entrepreneurial and very much a creator, which was awesome. Certainly there was never like growing up our family, like money is the root of all evil. Like that was not like the concept or like shared as a phrase. But I think my point is when I was growing up, I used to think more like, man, making money, specifically more though, like having material things or wealth or resources to be able to use that, like that would just either be like, you'd have to sacrifice everything to do that. Period, I guess really is like you'd have to sacrifice everything to do that. And I think what I've found throughout the years is just that not being the case. I think God has blessed me with a lot of like great relationships, great opportunities. I'm not saying I've been necessarily, of course, not the most successful person, quote unquote, from a material lens, et cetera. But main point, what I'm trying to say is growing up, I think I thought more like, man, material wealth, like you'd have to sacrifice everything to have it. And now that I fundamentally just don't believe that. I think it's truly a tool to be used. I think there are dangers to that tool. There's an unlimitedness, right, to make money, et cetera, but like fundamentally it's a tool to be used. And so I think that's been a huge belief that has changed for me over time. I think another one, just real quick, to share it back to focus. Yeah. I used to kind of lean more into the phrase of like, you can be anything you want to be and you can kind of do all things. And the more that I've lived life, the more I'm like, no, you can't. And like, you have to focus on the few things that really matter and prioritize those. And that's a huge one for me. I think, again, that takes a ton of discipline, a ton of patience, a ton of humility. I'm still very much living that journey every single day. But that's been a huge learning lesson for me in my life, is that like you can only be great at a few things. So you got to choose really carefully what those are going to be. And there's no like one right answer. I'm just saying you got to choose really carefully what those things are going to be.
That's one thing Brian asked me to ask you, which you kind of already answered the question, but I'll just ask it again and maybe you can kind of reiterate or rephrase, is being a father, having kids, working a full-time job, having side passions that you're doing, having maybe side work or side like money making businesses. How do you juggle all that? And at the end of the day, like obviously your family comes first. So how do you prioritize that? There's kind of a practical sense of my wife needs me to do X, so I have to do X, or my kids need me to be here, so I have to be there. But at what point are you sacrificing maybe like kind of temporal current pleasures, because at the end of the day, that's going to provide for your kids to go to college, or that's going to be like your retirement plan. And at what point do you just say, you know what, it's not worth it. I don't want to miss my kids growing up. So how do you find that balance? Obviously there's no perfect answer, but just maybe just a few words of wisdom on that. Like what for guys who are either in your situation or, maybe 10 years behind, who don't have kids yet, or just barely, just started a family. How do you look at that? Like how do you set up your future and also not sacrifice your kids growing up, and do both without killing yourself?
Yeah. Boy, that's a tough one. You know what I mean? I think that's absolutely right. We're all living through that right now. I think some of the things that have been helpful for guiding me here are some principles that have been really helpful for guiding me. I think one of them has been, the idea that like presence to your children is extraordinarily powerful, and like true undivided attention. So kind of quality over quantity. Now you got to be careful, right? You can use that almost as like a weapon of like, well, those 10 minutes I spent with them today, it's like, whoa, like, might need to check, kind of what you're saying yes to say again. You might need to say no to some things so you can say yes to obviously your children, right? Sure. But one principle has been like quality over quantity, right? The power of attention and presence. I think that's been a great guiding principle. I think another one for me has been, basically like kind of maxing out, trying to max out in every part of the day. And so like the parts of the day where I'm spending working, I'm trying to max those out. And let me give you like some practicals I think are helpful, just like real quick, of like, what do I mean by that? Or what does that mean to me? At work, for example, it's so important to be present to your coworkers. Coffee conversations, water cooler conversations, the passing smile and comment, like those things are like extraordinarily powerful. But at the same time, there's a lot of like waste of time I think I see when it comes to work, right? Where like kind of, just a lot of like non-productive conversations going on, right? And so the question is like, how disciplined are you going to be in the moments when you're working? Because again, this to me is the one. It's like every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. And so for me, it's a constant evaluation of like, what am I saying yes to that might potentially be a no to my children, or a no to my wife, or a no to being present to my family as a whole? That is a great guiding principle, right? Yeah. So again, no perfect answer, but those are some of the principles I think I've found: quality over quantity, presence and attention, and then the other one being, again, like kind of the yes and no funnel through which you look at things. Okay. That's such a great question, and we're all who are in that boat going through it. But that's been really powerful for me to help make decisions. I also think too, like you often hear like work-life balance or like the balance in life. That's got to be defined, right? Like that phrase gets thrown around all the time. And it's like, look, like there's ebbs and flows, right? There's seasons of life where like you're incredibly, incredibly focused on work. There's seasons of life where you're incredibly like no to work, and you say yes to your family and to all things that your family is about. So
a really good, just a quick comment on that. I don't know if you've ever listened to Dr. John Deloney. He works for the Ramsey Network. I would really recommend him. He's a therapist, but he started off his career in academia. He then did counseling for like critical like 911 calls, right? Mm-hmm. So car crash, everyone dies but one person. He would be the person talking to the person that survived, trying to get a head start on, hey, it wasn't your fault. Hey, you didn't do anything wrong. Hey, I'm going to come to my office tomorrow. I want to take you out to coffee, that. And then from there, now he does kind of like, as the Ramsey program does, kind of on air counseling. So someone, hey, my husband cheated on me. What do I do? Or, hey, we're $100,000 in debt. How do we get out of this? But we want to stay married. He's threatening divorce. Like all these really messy situations, and he kind of walks people through it. Obviously, those are all like extreme scenarios, but he's been on a lot of different podcasts. He's pretty well known. But one thing that he talks about, which really rang true for me, and it's like exactly what you're saying, is that he really emphasizes like seasons of life, where he's like, hey, what you need to do is sit down with your spouse and say, hey, work is really busy. I just got a promotion. I kind of need to show myself to the new boss. I'm writing a book. I'm going to be traveling for the book signing. I've got some lectures and some podcasts. But after that, what I'm going to do is take off a month for Christmas, and I'm not going to check my phone. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. We're going to travel. We're going to do these things and kind of paint the picture. Like this is my plan. And then let's get on board with the plan. And that way the wife isn't upset that you're traveling, that you're doing all these book tour things, that you're signing, because then she's just going to think that you don't care about her. And then you show, hey, I do care about you, and I'm leaving all this stuff behind, even though I have opportunities to be with your family, be with our kids, do these things. And then spring comes around. Okay, what's our plan? Is this going to be a busy season? Hey, we have a kid that's teething. We have a kid that's going into school. We have a kid that's in sports. Okay, I'm going to cut back on work so we can handle this. And just kind of reevaluating every month or so, what season of life are we in? Are we in a busy season where we need to cut back on spending, cut back on extra things, cut back on the extra stuff? and focus on the family? Or is this a month where actually we're okay? The summer's not that busy. Work is pretty easy. I'm doing some online stuff, and we're going to travel, and we're going to do these things and take advantage of this time. Yeah. And I'd never really heard it kind of verbalized that way, but the way that he kind of talks about it, I was like, that is such a good idea. And I feel like so many people get in this idea of like, we have to do X and then just keep doing it. And that's not sustainable. So you need to figure out, is this a busy season? Is this a slow season? Is this a stressful season? Is money tight? And then how are we making those decisions? And then every month we kind of readjust. And overall, that's going to be so much better for you and your marriage and all of that, rather than just, well, this is a good opportunity, so I'm just going to keep traveling. Well, that's probably not good for your family. Yeah. And what does that look like practically? And then being able to have those hard conversations and figure out what you need to say no to make what's actually important happen.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Amazing. I would definitely recommend looking into him. Any last thoughts on anything?
No, I would just say keep this up, Anthony.
Sweet.
Like seriously.
Yeah.
This has been, I've listened to several of the episodes that you've done.
Probably not this one, right?
Well, not yet. It's a labor of love, man. Like, I think, again, it kind of goes back to like this focus and commitment. Like people underestimate. It's easy. Let me rephrase that. It is easy to underestimate how much work goes into making good things.
Sure.
And this is a good thing that you have started here with Doing Virtue. And so truly keep it up, because it takes a lot of time. Obviously, you're spending 3 hours with me, which I'm so grateful for. Here has been an incredible conversation. I've really, really appreciated it. But that's time out of your evening, out of your family's evening, that you're obviously anchoring the ship of the podcast and making this happen. So seriously, like, keep it up.
Thank you.
It is an awesome podcast.
Yeah. Well, and right back to you, like, I always am kind of blown away by people who I constantly tell people who come to the studio to do this that if I were them, I would not come. I'm like, if some like young whippersnapper reached out to me and said, hey, we have a small podcast, we want to talk to you about like X, Y, and Z, I'd be like, no, that doesn't sound fun. And then maybe if they like tempted me with bourbon, I'd be like, okay, I'll come for an hour. But I'm always very appreciative of people who come. And I think that regardless of every single guest we've had on has surprised me in some way, because I always think the conversation is going to go one way, and I'll write notes and I'll kind of like do a little research, and it always goes a different way, and it's always better than how I would have planned it. And I like the flexibility of that. Yeah. It can get derailed and it can be boring, but I think that generally it's real conversation. There's obviously some real points. And then what I like about it is a lot of times after a podcast, I'm like, I really want to talk to them again, because then that sets up either a future conversation, or if they start their own thing, I can come on their podcast, or even if we never talk in the podcast again, like we're going to go to the Artifacts event with Father Pine tomorrow. Totally. Like, great. Now I get to see him in kind of a different context, and we had this 3 hours that we didn't have before. And now I have like kind of another friend that's closer because they joined in this odd, random, specific, like weren't checking our phones for 3 hours conversation that barely ever happens these days. So anyway, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate the time. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you miss Mark and Brian, let me know, because I'll try to get them back for next time. And hopefully we'll have more conversations with Jeremy in the future. And thanks for listening. Cheers. Have a good night, everyone.
Cheers.
Appreciate you listening.